In our hyper-connected world, we are conditioned to care intensely about everything. News headlines demand our outrage. Social media feeds pull at our attention. Advertisements insist we should worry about problems we never knew existed. This constant caring becomes an invisible burden we carry everywhere. Caring too much about too many things doesn't make us better people. Instead, it depletes our limited emotional resources and leaves us exhausted. Learning to care less isn't about becoming cold or indifferent. It's about becoming intentional with your emotional energy. This is a practice of emotional wisdom, recognizing that selective caring leads to deeper fulfillment and more meaningful impact where it truly matters. The following reasons will invite you to reconsider where your care is currently directed and whether it serves your highest good. Part 1. The opinions of others. Human beings are social creatures with minds designed to be hypersensitive to what others think of us. This made perfect sense in small tribal communities where rejection meant physical danger. Today, however, we live surrounded by thousands of strangers whose opinions have virtually no impact on our actual well-being. Yet we continue to sacrifice our authentic expression to avoid their judgment. Consider how many clothes remain unworn in your closet because you worry what someone might think. Reflect on how many thoughts remain unspoken because you fear how they might be received. The irony is that most people are far too preoccupied with their own image to be paying close attention to yours. Even when they do judge you, their opinion is shaped more by their own insecurities than by your reality. Caring less about these judgments doesn't mean becoming inconsiderate. It means recognizing that living to please everyone is impossible and exhausting. When you stop performing for an imaginary audience, you discover who you actually are. This authenticity attracts people who appreciate you for genuine reasons. The momentary discomfort of potential judgment is a small price for the freedom of self-determination. Remember that those who mind don't matter, and those who matter don't mind. Part 2. Perfection and Control. The human mind craves certainty and perfect outcomes. We plan meticulously, attempting to control variables that are fundamentally uncontrollable. We rehearse conversations before they happen, trying to script reality. We obsess over details that few will notice, pursuing flawlessness in all endeavors. This perfectionism creates a perpetual state of tension, as nothing in life ever unfolds exactly as planned. The weather changes unexpectedly on your wedding day. Technology fails during your important presentation. Children grow up with personalities different than what you envisioned. These inevitable deviations from our perfect scenarios become sources of immense frustration and disappointment. We interpret them as personal failures rather than the natural unpredictability of existence. Caring less about perfect outcomes doesn't mean embracing mediocrity. It means acknowledging the beauty in what actually emerges, rather than mourning what might have been. It means recognizing that some of life's most meaningful moments were never planned at all. The unexpected conversation that changed your perspective. The detour that led to a breathtaking view. The imperfect job that introduced you to a lifelong friend. When we loosen our grip on perfect outcomes, we open ourselves to receiving life's organic unfolding with grace. This flexibility is the foundation of resilience and lasting contentment. Part 3. Past Mistakes and Regrets. Our minds excel at replaying past errors with remarkable clarity and emotional intensity. The embarrassing comment made years ago. The missed opportunity. The relationship we mishandled. the poor decision that altered our path. These memories can hijack our present moments, pulling us back into old pain and shame repeatedly. We become time travelers stuck in loops of regret rather than fully inhabiting our current reality. What makes this pattern particularly destructive is that no amount of mental revisiting can actually change what occurred. The past exists only in our memory, yet consumes energy needed for present challenges. Many carry these regrets like heavy stones, collecting more with each passing year until the burden becomes overwhelming. We punish ourselves far longer than anyone else would judge us. Caring less about past mistakes doesn't mean denying responsibility. It means extracting the lesson, making amends where possible, and then consciously releasing the emotional attachment. Consider that your past self made decisions with the awareness, resources and capacity available at that time. Would you harshly judge a stranger for lacking knowledge they hadn't yet acquired? This compassion we readily offer others should extend to our former selves. The path to wisdom is paved with mistakes, and each error has shaped your current understanding. When you stop defining yourself by your worst moments, you create space for growth and redemption. Your history is a teacher, not a sentence to perpetual regret. Part 4. Status and external validation. From childhood we are trained to seek external markers of success and worth. Gold stars on homework. Trophies for achievement. As adults, these evolve into promotions, luxury purchases, social media metrics, and public recognition. We chase these symbols believing they will finally confirm our value. This pursuit creates a hollow form of motivation, where we work not for the inherent meaning of our contributions, but for how they will be perceived. We buy homes beyond our needs to impress visitors who rarely come. We pursue career paths that look impressive but leave us feeling empty. We craft social media personas that bear little resemblance to our daily lived experience. The cruel irony is that external validation is fundamentally insatiable. The moment of recognition provides a brief dopamine rush, quickly replaced by hunger for the next achievement. The promotion excites for a week, then becomes your new normal. The luxury purchase thrills for a month before becoming ordinary. This hedonic treadmill keeps us running without ever reaching a destination of lasting satisfaction. Meanwhile, we sacrifice time, health and relationships, chasing symbols that ultimately fail to nourish our deeper needs. Caring less about status doesn't mean abandoning ambition. It means examining whose definition of success you've adopted and whether it aligns with your authentic values. It means recognizing that the quiet satisfaction of living by your principles offers more sustainable fulfillment than external applause. The person who needs nothing to prove has discovered true freedom. Part 5. Being right and winning arguments. Few things trigger our defensive instincts more powerfully than being wrong. We experience disagreement as a threat to our very identity. This explains why seemingly minor differences of opinion can escalate into relationship-ending conflicts. We fight viciously over politics, parenting approaches, or even pronunciation of words. The need to be right becomes particularly destructive in close relationships. Partners mentally catalogue each other's errors to deploy during arguments. Family members hold grudges for years over disputes neither side remembers clearly. Friends drift apart because neither will concede a point of view. What makes this pattern so tragic is how little is actually gained by winning these battles. Even when you convince someone they are wrong, the victory is often Pyrrhic. They may concede the point while silently resenting your approach. The relationship suffers damage that outweighs any benefit of being proven correct. Caring less about being right doesn't mean abandoning your values or beliefs. It means recognizing that understanding is more valuable than conversion. It means approaching disagreements with curiosity rather than combat readiness. What might you learn from this different perspective? What fears or experiences might be shaping their view that you haven't considered? When winning becomes less important than connecting, conversations transform from debates into explorations. The wisest among us understand that being proven wrong is actually a gift. It means you now have more accurate information than you did before. This humility creates space for genuine growth, while rigid correctness keeps us trapped in limited understanding. The phrase, "you might be right," can heal divisions that no perfectly crafted argument ever could. Part 6. Daily News and Global Crises. Our modern information environment bombards us with catastrophes and conflicts from across the globe. Natural disasters, political upheavals and human suffering stream directly into our consciousness through screens we check dozens of times daily. We're biologically unprepared for this constant exposure to tragedy occurring thousands of miles away. Our brains evolved to process and respond to threats within our immediate community, not the entire planet simultaneously. This continuous awareness of global suffering creates a persistent background anxiety that never fully resolves. We feel vaguely responsible for problems we cannot meaningfully impact. The weight of the world's pain becomes our daily emotional burden, yet our capacity to affect these distant situations remains severely limited. Meanwhile, our nervous systems remain in a state of low-grade emergency, impacting our health and well-being. Caring less about the daily news cycle doesn't mean becoming ignorant or apathetic about important issues. It means being intentional about how and when you consume information. It means recognizing that being perpetually informed about tragedies you cannot influence serves neither you nor those suffering. Your emotional distress about a conflict halfway around the world helps no one if it leaves you depleted for the relationships and work directly before you. Consider instead directing your finite care toward causes where your specific skills and resources can create tangible impact. Focus on the sphere of influence where your actions matter concretely. This targeted caring is ultimately more effective than diffuse anxiety about everything everywhere. By protecting your emotional resources from unnecessary depletion, you preserve the energy needed for meaningful contribution where it truly counts. Part 7. Following every trend. The modern marketplace thrives on convincing us that constant upgrading and updating is essential. New phone models, fashion cycles, home decor styles, and wellness practices emerge at an exhausting pace. Influencers and advertisers create artificial urgency around products and experiences that didn't exist months earlier. Suddenly everyone seems to need mushroom coffee, luxury water bottles, or whatever item currently dominates social feeds. The pressure to keep up with these shifting trends creates both financial strain and cognitive overwhelm. We discard perfectly functional possessions to acquire marginally improved versions. We adopt complex routines and practices that may not align with our actual needs or values. What begins as genuine curiosity becomes an endless chase for the cutting edge, leaving little time to deeply appreciate what we already have. This treadmill of consumption operates on the false premise that novelty equals improvement. Yet research consistently shows that the happiness boost from new acquisitions fades remarkably quickly. The pleasure of the latest technology diminishes within weeks as it becomes your new normal. Meanwhile, the constant pursuit of the new prevents the development of deeper satisfaction that comes from mastery and familiarity. Caring less about following trends doesn't mean rejecting innovation or quality. It means thoughtfully evaluating whether a new offering genuinely serves your values and improves your life. It means recognizing when your desire for something stems from marketing rather than authentic need. When you step off the trend treadmill, you discover the freedom to curate a life based on personal meaning rather than collective momentum. This intentionality creates both financial savings and mental space for what truly matters to you specifically, not what everyone else momentarily values. The peace found in selective engagement with trends far outweighs the fleeting validation of constant conformity. Part 8. Social media metrics. We have created digital ecosystems where human worth is disturbingly quantifiable. Likes, followers, shares, and comments have become proxies for our value and impact. We compulsively check these metrics, riding waves of validation or disappointment based on how others respond to our digital offerings. A post that performs poorly can genuinely affect our mood and self-perception for hours afterwards. This dependency creates a troubling shift in our creative and social motivations. We begin crafting experiences specifically for their shareability rather than their intrinsic value. The scenic hike becomes a photo opportunity. The thoughtful reflection becomes optimized for algorithm approval. Our authentic voice gradually morphs into whatever generates the most engagement, regardless of whether it represents our genuine perspective. We perform increasingly for an audience rather than expressing from our center. The metrics themselves are problematically arbitrary. They measure reaction, not impact or meaning. A thoughtful post that changes one person's perspective profoundly might receive fewer likes than a provocative statement that briefly entertains many. The algorithm rewards what captures attention, not what nurtures growth or understanding. Yet we internalize these numbers as meaningful feedback about our contributions and, by extension, ourselves. This misalignment between digital metrics and actual value creates persistent dissatisfaction. Caring less about social validation doesn't mean abandoning connection or expression. It means remembering that the most meaningful moments of your life have likely occurred entirely offline. It means creating from authentic impulse rather than anticipated reception. When you measure your contributions by their alignment with your values rather than their virality, you reclaim creative agency. The quiet satisfaction of expression that feels true, regardless of its performance, provides a sustainable foundation for genuine confidence. True impact rarely correlates with quantifiable engagement. Part 9. Others' Life Milestones. Social comparison has accelerated dramatically in the age of constant visibility. We witness a curated stream of others' accomplishments, celebrations, and acquisitions through our screens. Engagement announcements, job promotions, home purchases, and pregnancy reveals arrive faster than we can process our emotional responses to them. This creates an artificial sense that everyone is progressing except us. The traditional life milestones themselves have become loaded with excessive meaning. Marriage, home ownership, career advancement, and parenthood are treated as universal markers of success and fulfillment. Those following different timelines or alternative paths often feel increasing pressure to explain or justify their choices. We internalize the subtle message that diverging from these expected milestones requires explanation, while conforming to them does not. What makes this comparison particularly destructive is its selectivity. We compare our complete, complex lives to carefully edited highlights from others. We see their vacation photos, but not their financial stress. We witness their professional achievements, but not their relationship struggles. This creates an impossible standard against which we measure our messy, unfiltered reality. Inevitably, we find ourselves lacking in comparison to these partial representations. Caring less about others' milestones doesn't mean becoming unsupportive or disinterested in friends' lives. It means recognizing that fulfillment follows no standardized timeline or universal path. It means understanding that your journey's value comes from its alignment with your unique values and circumstances, not its resemblance to a collective template. When you release the pressure to keep pace with others' trajectories, you create space to discover what genuine progress means specifically for you. This authenticity ultimately leads to more sustainable satisfaction than achievement driven by external expectations. Your life's meaning emerges from its particular shape, not its conformity to prefabricated milestones. Part 10. Physical Appearance and Aging. We inhabit a culture obsessively focused on physical appearance, particularly the pursuit of perpetual youth. Billion-dollar industries thrive on reinforcing our insecurities about normal bodily changes. Grey hairs, wrinkles, weight fluctuations, and other natural variations are reframed as problems requiring intervention rather than evidence of a life fully lived. We're taught to wage constant war against our body's natural evolution. This fixation creates profound disconnection from our physical selves. We come to see our bodies as projects requiring endless improvement rather than the remarkable vessels carrying us through life. Hours spent scrutinizing perceived flaws in mirrors draw focus away from the lived experience of embodiment. The joy of movement, sensory pleasure, and physical capability becomes secondary to appearance. Even more troubling is how this preoccupation accelerates the very thing we fear. Research clearly shows that negative attitudes toward aging correlate with worse health outcomes. The stress of appearance fixation actually speeds cellular aging processes. Meanwhile, cultures with positive views of aging show dramatically better health in their elderly populations. Our fear of looking old ironically makes us age less gracefully, both mentally and physically. We sacrifice present contentment for an impossible ideal of arrested development. Caring less about physical appearance doesn't mean abandoning health or self-care. It means separating aesthetic outcomes from well-being practices. It means exercising for strength and vitality rather than achieving a specific look. It means nourishing your body based on how foods make you feel rather than how they might shape you. When appearance becomes a byproduct rather than the primary goal, a more sustainable relationship with your body emerges. This shift creates space to appreciate what your body does for you rather than how it appears to others. Consider that at the end of life, few regret not spending more time fighting their appearance. Many, however, wish they had appreciated their bodies more when they were healthy and capable. This perspective reveals the tragic misallocation of attention that appearance fixation creates. The freedom found in caring less about looks isn't lowered standards, but elevated priorities. Part 11. Small talk and surface relationships. Modern social dynamics often emphasize breadth over depth in human connection. We maintain dozens or even hundreds of acquaintances with whom we exchange pleasantries and updates. These interactions follow predictable scripts about weather, work, and recent activities. They create the appearance of connection while requiring minimal vulnerability or authentic presence. This pattern of widespread shallow connection creates a troubling paradox. Despite being more socially connected than ever, loneliness rates continue to rise dramatically across developed nations. Many find themselves surrounded by people yet feeling fundamentally unseen and unknown. The energy invested in maintaining numerous surface relationships depletes resources needed for deeper bonds. What makes this situation particularly insidious is that surface interactions provide just enough social contact to temporarily alleviate loneliness without addressing its root causes. We receive small dopamine hits from brief exchanges that keep us coming back for more of the same. Meanwhile, the courage required for deeper connection remains undeveloped. We become accustomed to relationships that demand little and therefore yield little in return. Caring less about maintaining an extensive social network doesn't mean becoming isolated or antisocial. It means being intentional about where you invest your relational energy. It means recognizing that a few profound connections nurture your spirit more effectively than dozens of acquaintances. When you release the obligation to stay current with everyone you've ever met, you create space for relationships with genuine depth and meaning. Consider that the most transformative conversations rarely happen at large gatherings or through digital small talk. They emerge in extended, unrushed interactions where masks can gradually drop. This quality of presence becomes possible when you stop dispersing your attention across a wide social landscape. The freedom found in caring less about social breadth creates capacity for the connection that actually sustains us. Part 12. Productivity and Busyness. Our culture has developed a troubling reverence for busyness and productivity above all else. Being overwhelmed with tasks and commitments has become a strange status symbol. We signal our importance through complaints about packed schedules and endless to-do lists. Meanwhile, rest and contemplation are treated as indulgences rather than necessities. This glorification of constant activity creates a distorted relationship with time. We measure our days by output rather than meaning or presence. Activities without tangible products or metrics feel increasingly difficult to justify. Reading for pleasure, unstructured conversation, or simply observing the world around us becomes categorized as doing nothing. Yet these supposedly unproductive moments often generate our most profound insights and meaningful connections. We sacrifice them on the altar of measurable accomplishment. The addiction to productivity becomes particularly destructive when applied to leisure. Vacations become opportunities to visit as many landmarks as possible rather than truly experiencing any of them. Weekends transform into periods for completing household tasks rather than genuine renewal. Even meditation and mindfulness become items to check off rather than practices of presence. The question, "What did you accomplish today?" replaces, "What did you experience or learn today?" This shift fundamentally changes our relationship with being alive. Caring less about constant productivity doesn't mean embracing laziness or irresponsibility. It means recognizing that human value extends far beyond economic output or task completion. It means understanding that periods of apparent unproductivity are essential for creativity, connection, and meaning-making. When you stop measuring your worth by your output, you create space for the full spectrum of human experience. Consider that history's most profound thinkers and creators understood the necessity of contemplative space. Their contributions emerged not from constant busyness, but from periods of deep reflection. This wisdom reveals the tragic irony of productivity obsession. In our relentless pursuit of doing more, we may actually accomplish less of lasting significance. Part 13. Material possessions. Our consumer culture encourages us to develop emotional attachments to physical objects. We invest significant meaning in our possessions, seeing them as extensions of our identity and worth. Advertisements skillfully link products to our deepest human desires for belonging, respect, and security. We begin to believe that specific items will transform not just our circumstances, but our very selves. This emotional investment creates a troubling relationship with the material world. We experience disproportionate distress when possessions are damaged, lost, or stolen. We protect and maintain items at considerable cost to our time, energy, and financial resources. Houses expand to accommodate growing collections of things that require management and care. The freedom of mobility and flexibility diminishes with each new acquisition that anchors us. We become, in a very real sense, possessed by our possessions. What makes this attachment particularly problematic is how quickly the satisfaction of ownership fades. The new car thrills for weeks before becoming background reality. The coveted device excites briefly before joining the landscape of the familiar. Yet we continue to believe that the next purchase will somehow deliver lasting fulfillment where previous acquisitions failed. This cycle creates perpetual dissatisfaction, alongside mounting responsibility for maintaining what we've already accumulated. Our possessions promise freedom, but often deliver constraint. Caring less about material possessions doesn't mean embracing asceticism or deprivation. It means developing a more intentional relationship with ownership based on utility and genuine joy rather than status or emotional compensation. It means recognizing when an object serves your life and when it burdens it. When you hold possessions more lightly, you create space for experiences and connections that research consistently links to lasting well-being. Consider that at the end of life, few people express gratitude for the things they owned. Many, however, treasure memories of experiences shared and connections forged. This perspective reveals the misplaced significance we often assign to the material. The liberation found in caring less about possessions extends far beyond cleared closets to fundamental shifts in how we measure value and success. Part 14. Professional identity. Many of us have fused our sense of self so completely with our professional roles that we struggle to recognize where the job ends and the person begins. The question, "What do you do?" has become synonymous with "Who are you?" in social interactions. We internalize the implicit message that our value correlates directly with our occupational status and achievement. Our business cards become shorthand for our worth as human beings. This narrow identification creates profound vulnerability to circumstantial changes. Job loss, career transitions, or retirement can trigger genuine identity crises. Without the professional title and role, many experience a disturbing emptiness. Who am I if not a doctor, executive, teacher, or whatever role previously defined me? This question reveals how profoundly we've allowed occupational identities to overshadow other dimensions of selfhood. We've built our self-concept on the shifting sands of professional status. The over-identification with work creates additional problems even while employed. Criticism of our work feels like criticism of our very being. Setbacks and failures in professional contexts threaten our fundamental sense of worth. The boundary between personal time and work time blurs as the professional identity demands constant maintenance and validation. We sacrifice health, relationships, and exploration of other interests to protect and advance this narrow aspect of self. The singular focus diminishes rather than enhances our human potential. Caring less about professional identity doesn't mean becoming uncommitted or performing poorly. It means recognizing that your job is something you do, not everything you are. It means developing and nurturing aspects of self that exist independently of occupational achievement. When you expand your self-concept beyond the professional, you create psychological resilience against the inevitable changes in work status. Consider how many discover their broader humanity only when illness or crisis forces them to step away from professional roles. This revelation comes as both liberation and grief for the dimensions of self left unexplored. This pattern reveals the hidden cost of over-identification with work. The freedom found in caring less about professional identity opens space for a more integrated and sustainable sense of self. Part 15. Comfort and Convenience. Our modern existence is increasingly optimized for comfort and convenience above all other values. We expect immediate satisfaction of our needs with minimal effort or discomfort. One-click shopping, instant entertainment, climate-controlled environments, and effort-saving devices insulate us from even minor inconveniences or delays. This constant cushioning reshapes our expectations and tolerances in profound ways. The pursuit of perpetual comfort creates a troubling paradox. As our experience of discomfort decreases, our sensitivity to it increases dramatically. Minor inconveniences that previous generations would barely notice become legitimate sources of distress. A slow internet connection, slightly uncomfortable temperature, or brief wait feels genuinely intolerable. Our capacity to endure normal friction in daily living steadily diminishes. This lowered threshold for discomfort ultimately restricts rather than expands our freedom. What makes this pattern particularly problematic is how it separates us from growth opportunities. Meaningful development rarely occurs within the borders of comfort and convenience. New skills demand the discomfort of incompetence before mastery emerges. Deep relationships require the inconvenience of compromise and accommodation. Significant achievements necessitate sustained effort through periods of tedium and challenge. When we organize life around avoiding these productive discomforts, we inadvertently avoid growth itself. Caring less about comfort and convenience doesn't mean embracing needless suffering or inefficiency. It means developing a more nuanced relationship with discomfort that recognizes its potential value. It means distinguishing between productive and unproductive forms of challenge. When you welcome strategic discomfort rather than reflexively avoiding it, you expand your capacity for meaningful accomplishment and experience. Consider how many of life's most valued memories emerge from situations that were, in the moment, decidedly uncomfortable or inconvenient. The challenging travel experience that became a favorite story. The difficult project that pushed beyond perceived limitations. The inconvenient detour that led to unexpected discovery. This pattern reveals the hidden cost of prioritizing comfort above all else. The freedom found in caring less about convenience opens pathways to richer, if occasionally less comfortable living. Part 16. Fast Results and Instant Gratification. Our technological landscape has dramatically accelerated the pace at which we expect results from virtually every endeavor. We become impatient with processes that require sustained effort over time. Books are abandoned if not immediately captivating. Diets are discarded if not producing visible results within days. Relationships are questioned if they require work rather than providing instant connection. This impatience fundamentally changes our relationship with mastery and depth. The demand for immediate outcomes creates a troubling pattern of superficial engagement. We skim rather than absorb, sample rather than commit, start rather than finish. The genuine satisfaction that emerges from persistent engagement remains largely unexperienced. We sacrifice depth for breadth, mastery for novelty, fulfillment for stimulation. This trade ultimately leaves us restless and perpetually dissatisfied, constantly moving yet never arriving. The promised efficiency of acceleration delivers less rather than more. What makes this pattern particularly destructive is how it misaligns with the actual nature of meaningful development. Most worthwhile achievements follow a non-linear trajectory with plateaus, regressions, and breakthroughs. Visible progress often lags significantly behind actual development. We appear to make little advancement for extended periods before sudden leaps forward. When we abandon efforts during inevitable plateaus due to impatience, we systematically miss the breakthroughs that would have followed persistence. Our intolerance for delayed gratification becomes a self-imposed limitation. Caring less about immediate results doesn't mean becoming complacent or undisciplined. It means developing a more mature relationship with time and process. It means recognizing that meaningful outcomes often require sustained engagement through periods of apparent stagnation. When you release the demand for constant, visible progress, you create space for deeper development that follows its own necessary timeline. Consider how many abandoned instruments gather dust in closets. How many half-finished creative projects sit in drawers? How many partially developed skills remain unperfected? These represent not just personal abandonments, but cultural ones. A collective impatience that sacrifices mastery on the altar of immediacy. The freedom found in caring less about instant results opens possibilities for achievements that require the slow unfolding of committed practice. Part 17. Others' Expectations. From earliest childhood, we internalize expectations from parents, teachers, peers, and broader society about who we should become and how we should live. These external standards gradually embed themselves so deeply in our psyche that we can no longer distinguish them from our own authentic desires. We pursue paths and make choices to fulfill expectations we never consciously chose to adopt. Our lives become expressions of others' values rather than our own. This pattern creates a profound form of alienation from self. We achieve goals that bring little genuine satisfaction. We accumulate accomplishments that fail to resonate with our deeper nature. We construct lives that look successful from the outside while feeling hollow from within. The disconnect between external achievement and internal fulfillment grows increasingly painful. Yet we often respond by doubling down on meeting expectations rather than questioning their relevance. What makes this situation particularly tragic is that many discover too late that they've been living according to someone else's script. The realization often arrives at midlife, when accumulated achievements fail to yield the promised fulfillment. The prestigious career, perfect family, and material success suddenly reveal themselves as insufficient when not aligned with authentic values. This awakening brings both opportunity for redirection and grief for the time invested in pursuits that were never truly one's own. Caring less about others' expectations doesn't mean rejecting all external guidance or becoming selfish. It means developing the discernment to distinguish between expectations that align with your genuine values and those that don't. It means recognizing when you're making choices to please others rather than to express your authentic self. When you release the need to fulfill others' visions for your life, you create space to discover and pursue what genuinely matters to you. Consider that at the end of life few regret following their own path, even when it disappointed others. Many, however, express profound regret for lives lived according to others' expectations. This pattern reveals the hidden cost of excessive accommodation to external standards. The freedom found in caring less about others' expectations opens possibilities for a life that feels authentic rather than borrowed. Part 18. Imagined disasters. The human mind possesses a remarkable capacity to generate detailed visions of potential catastrophes that never actually materialize. We play mental movies of worst-case scenarios with ourselves as the unfortunate protagonists. The presentation that ends in humiliation. The relationship that concludes in devastating rejection. The financial decision that leads to total ruin. These imagined disasters feel genuinely threatening despite existing only in our thoughts. This anticipatory anxiety creates suffering that often exceeds what would occur in the actual negative event. We experience the emotional pain of disasters multiple times in imagination, even when the feared outcome never occurs. Research shows that humans consistently overestimate both the intensity and duration of negative emotions that would result from setbacks. We fail to account for our remarkable capacity for adaptation and resilience. This miscalculation leads to excessive avoidance of perceived risks. We constrain our lives to prevent catastrophes that exist primarily in our imagination. What makes this pattern particularly limiting is how it narrows our willingness to attempt meaningful pursuits. Asking for the promotion, expressing romantic interest, or pursuing creative projects all involve the possibility of negative outcomes. When we vividly imagine these potential rejections or failures, we often conclude that the risk exceeds the potential reward. We choose the certain mediocrity of inaction over the possibility of both failure and success. Our lives contract around what feels safe rather than expanding toward what might fulfill. We sacrifice opportunity on the altar of imagined disaster. Caring less about potential catastrophes doesn't mean becoming reckless or abandoning prudent planning. It means developing a more realistic assessment of both the likelihood and consequences of negative outcomes. It means recognizing when fear of disaster has become disproportionate to actual risk. When you release the grip of catastrophic thinking, you create space for calculated risks that make meaningful growth possible. Consider how many of life's most significant opportunities arrive packaged as situations containing both potential reward and potential setback. The job that stretches your capabilities. The relationship that requires vulnerability. The creative project that risks rejection. Each demands a willingness to proceed despite imagined disasters. The freedom found in caring less about potential catastrophes opens possibilities for experiences that justify their inherent risks. Part 19. Being busy enough. Our culture has developed a concerning equation between constant activity and moral virtue. We feel guilty during periods of rest or unstructured time. The question, "What did you do today?" carries an implicit judgment that doing nothing is failing. We fill our calendars to avoid confronting the discomfort of empty hours. This pattern reveals a fundamental anxiety about justifying our existence through perpetual productivity. Simply being no longer feels sufficient without constant doing. This compulsive busyness creates paradoxical inefficiency. We engage in low-value activities simply to maintain the sensation of progress. Email checking, unnecessary meetings, and administrative busy work consume hours that might otherwise allow for deeper focus or genuine rest. We mistake motion for progress, activity for achievement. The resulting exhaustion actually diminishes our capacity for meaningful contribution. We become simultaneously depleted and dissatisfied with our output. What makes this pattern particularly destructive is how it separates us from the present moment. Constant activity creates a state of perpetual anticipation, always looking toward the next task. We develop what philosophers call a divided mind, physically present but mentally elsewhere. This division prevents us from fully experiencing either our work or our leisure. Life becomes something we race through rather than inhabit. The irony is that this acceleration often decreases rather than increases our sense of time sufficiency. Caring less about constant busyness doesn't mean embracing laziness or irresponsibility. It means recognizing that periods of apparent inactivity serve essential functions in both creativity and well-being. It means distinguishing between busyness that contributes to meaningful goals and busyness that merely alleviates existential discomfort. When you release the need to always be doing something, you create space for the insights and renewal that emerge specifically during undirected time. Consider how many of humanity's most important breakthroughs occurred during moments of apparent idleness. Newton under the apple tree. Einstein during a daydream. The subconscious mind continues important work precisely when we stop consciously striving. This pattern reveals the hidden productivity within seeming inactivity. The freedom found in caring less about constant busyness opens possibilities for both greater well-being and more meaningful contribution. Part 20. Being interesting enough. In social contexts, many of us feel intense pressure to present ourselves as exceptionally interesting, knowledgeable, or accomplished. We carefully curate anecdotes, cultural references, and personal achievements to display during interactions. Conversations become opportunities for performance rather than connection. We assess their success by how impressively we presented ourselves, rather than what was genuinely exchanged. This performative approach creates significant anxiety and self-consciousness during social encounters. Instead of being present with others, we're busy monitoring our own presentation and reception. We become preoccupied with generating the next impressive statement rather than deeply listening to what's being shared. The result is a peculiar form of loneliness that persists even in the midst of social activity. We remain fundamentally disconnected while appearing socially engaged. The performance substitutes for genuine presence. What makes this pattern particularly harmful is how it misidentifies the actual source of meaningful connection. Research consistently shows that vulnerability and authentic self-disclosure, not impressive performance, create intimacy between people. Our attempts to appear interesting often prevent the very connections we hope to establish. The carefully maintained facade becomes a barrier rather than a bridge. Meanwhile, the energy required to sustain this performance leaves us depleted rather than nourished by social interaction. We sacrifice authentic connection for superficial impression management. Caring less about being perceived as interesting doesn't mean becoming dull or disengaged. It means recognizing that genuine curiosity about others often creates more meaningful connection than displays of personal fascination. It means understanding that authentic presence, even with ordinary experiences and emotions, fosters deeper relationships than carefully curated exceptionality. When you release the pressure to impress, you create space for the vulnerability that makes genuine connection possible. Consider how your most meaningful relationships likely involve people with whom you can simply be without performance or pretense. This comfort with authentic presence reveals what we truly seek in connection. Not to be found impressive, but to be seen and accepted as we actually are. The freedom found in caring less about being interesting enough opens possibilities for relationships based on authenticity rather than performance. Part 21. Having it all figured out. Our culture highly values certainty and definitive answers. We feel pressure to have clear positions on complex issues and comprehensive plans for our futures. Responding, "I don't know," or "I'm still figuring that out," feels increasingly uncomfortable in both professional and personal contexts. We develop premature conclusions to alleviate the discomfort of uncertainty. This pattern reveals a fundamental anxiety about the inherent ambiguity of human existence. Not knowing has become almost intolerable. This aversion to uncertainty creates numerous problems in our thinking and decision-making. We cling to initial conclusions despite contradictory evidence. We filter information to support existing beliefs rather than remaining open to perspective shifts. We make important life decisions based on insufficient exploration of options. The premature certainty closes off pathways that might lead to more fulfilling outcomes. We sacrifice discovery for the immediate comfort of having answers. What makes this pattern particularly limiting is how it separates us from the genuine complexity of life. Most significant questions, both personal and collective, involve nuance that resists simple resolution. Forcing complex realities into oversimplified frameworks inevitably distorts our understanding. We miss the richness that exists in the grey areas between black and white thinking. Our responses become increasingly inadequate to the actual challenges we face. The map no longer corresponds to the territory. Caring less about having everything figured out doesn't mean embracing intellectual laziness or abandoning the pursuit of understanding. It means developing greater comfort with provisional conclusions that remain open to revision. It means recognizing when certainty is premature given the available information. When you release the need for definitive answers to every question, you create space for the evolving understanding that complex realities require. Consider how intellectual and creative breakthroughs often emerge precisely when we suspend the demand for immediate resolution. The willingness to dwell in uncertainty allows new connections and insights to form. This pattern reveals the hidden productivity within not knowing. The freedom found in caring less about having it all figured out opens possibilities for more nuanced understanding and authentic engagement with life's complexity. Part 22. Always being happy. Our culture has increasingly embraced the troubling premise that constant happiness should be our default emotional state. Any deviation from positivity is framed as a problem requiring immediate resolution. Sadness, anger, grief, and anxiety are treated as abnormal interruptions to proper functioning, rather than essential aspects of human experience. This attitude creates a secondary suffering layer where we feel bad about feeling bad. This happiness imperative creates an exhausting requirement for emotional performance. We feel obligated to present as perpetually positive, regardless of our authentic experience. The question, "How are you?" has only one acceptable answer, regardless of reality. This disconnection between internal experience and external presentation creates psychological strain and inauthenticity in relationships. We become increasingly alienated from our genuine emotional landscape. The performance of happiness becomes another obligation rather than an authentic experience. What makes this pattern particularly destructive is how it pathologizes normal emotional responses to difficult circumstances. Grief following loss, anger at injustice, and anxiety amid uncertainty are not malfunctions but appropriate adaptations. These emotions contain valuable information and energy when properly engaged. By rushing to eliminate them, we lose their potential wisdom and motivational power. We also miss opportunities for the deeper connections that emerge when emotions are authentically shared. Our relationships remain on the surface when only positive emotions are welcome. Caring less about maintaining constant happiness doesn't mean cultivating misery or abandoning well-being. It means developing a more nuanced relationship with the full spectrum of human emotion. It means recognizing that emotional diversity rather than perpetual positivity characterizes psychological health. When you release the pressure to feel good all the time, you create space for the authentic emotional responses that make life rich and meaningful. Consider how many of life's most profound experiences involve complex emotional landscapes beyond simple happiness. The bittersweetness of watching children grow independent. The mingled grief and gratitude when honouring someone's memory. The nervous excitement before important challenges. This emotional complexity adds depth and texture to our experience. The freedom found in caring less about constant happiness opens possibilities for a more authentic and complete engagement with life. Part 23. Every injustice in the world. Our interconnected information environment exposes us to a constant stream of injustices occurring globally. Environmental destruction, human rights violations, corruption and suffering appear in our news feeds and social media with relentless frequency. We feel morally obligated to care deeply about each issue that comes to our attention. This expectation creates an impossible emotional burden that no human psyche was designed to bear. This overwhelming exposure leads many to experience what researchers call compassion fatigue or moral exhaustion. The emotional resources required to genuinely engage with endless suffering gradually deplete. We begin to emotionally detach as a survival mechanism, feeling increasingly numb to reports that once would have moved us deeply. This numbness often triggers guilt and shame, as we interpret our diminished emotional response as moral failure. We blame ourselves for a perfectly natural psychological adaptation to unsustainable emotional demands. The result is a cycle of emotional depletion followed by self-recrimination. What makes this pattern particularly destructive is how it actually reduces our capacity for effective action. Attempting to care intensely about numerous causes simultaneously disperses our finite energy and resources. We make small, symbolic contributions to many issues rather than meaningful impact on specific ones. The scattered approach ultimately serves neither the causes nor our own well-being. Meanwhile, the emotional overwhelm often leads to complete disengagement as a coping mechanism. We turn away entirely when selective caring might have been sustainable. Caring less about every injustice doesn't mean becoming callous or abandoning social responsibility. It means recognizing the ecological limits of individual caring capacity and directing it strategically. It means focusing attention on specific issues where your particular skills, resources and position allow for meaningful contribution. When you release the impossible burden of caring intensely about everything, you create space for sustainable, effective engagement with selected causes. Consider that throughout history, the most effective change agents typically focused their efforts narrowly, rather than addressing all societal problems simultaneously. Their impact came through depth of commitment to specific causes rather than breadth of concern. This pattern reveals the paradoxical effectiveness of more focused caring. The freedom found in caring less about every injustice opens possibilities for more meaningful contribution where your specific caring can truly matter. Part 24. Maintaining a perfect record. Many of us develop an unhealthy attachment to maintaining unblemished performance in various domains. We expect consistent excellence in our work, perfect adherence to health routines, and flawless execution of responsibilities. Any deviation from this perfect record feels like catastrophic failure rather than normal human variation. One missed workout becomes evidence that we lack discipline. One mistake at work suggests fundamental incompetence. One forgotten task confirms unreliability. This all-or-nothing thinking creates extreme psychological pressure and fragility. We become terrified of the inevitable human inconsistency. This perfectionism creates a troubling relationship with setbacks and challenges. Rather than viewing them as normal parts of any meaningful pursuit, we experience them as devastating evidence of inadequacy. This perspective makes recovery from inevitable missteps unnecessarily difficult. Missing one day of a habit often leads to abandoning it entirely. One professional error can trigger avoidance of similar challenges in the future. The perfect record mentality transforms temporary setbacks into permanent abandonment. What makes this pattern particularly destructive is how it misaligns with the actual path of mastery in any domain. Expertise develops not through perfect performance, but through persistent engagement with challenges, including regular failures. The master musician hits wrong notes during practice. The accomplished writer produces flawed first drafts. The successful entrepreneur launches products that miss the mark. Excellence emerges from consistent engagement rather than perfect execution. Caring less about a perfect record doesn't mean abandoning high standards or becoming complacent. It means developing a more realistic relationship with the inevitable variance in human performance. It means recognizing that sustainable excellence comes from how you respond to imperfect moments rather than avoiding them entirely. When you release the expectation of perfect consistency, you create space for the resilience that actual achievement requires. Consider how many potentially transformative pursuits remain unattempted due to fear of imperfect execution. The business never launched. The creative project never begun. The relationship never pursued. This pattern reveals the hidden cost of perfect record fixation. The freedom found in caring less about unblemished performance opens possibilities for more meaningful engagement with pursuits that matter despite inevitable imperfection. Part 25. Others' Drama and Gossip. Human social dynamics naturally generate interpersonal conflicts, misunderstandings and tensions. These situations create narratives that spread through social networks as gossip and drama. Many of us find ourselves drawn into these stories, investing emotional energy in conflicts that don't directly involve us. We develop strong opinions about situations where we possess incomplete information. This pattern reveals our natural but sometimes unhelpful tendency towards social monitoring and alliance formation. We're hardwired to track the shifting dynamics within our tribes. This involvement in others' conflicts creates several problems in our own emotional landscape. We experience stress and agitation about situations we cannot directly influence. We develop negative perceptions about individuals based on second-hand accounts rather than personal experience, We spend valuable mental bandwidth replaying and analyzing interactions that occurred between others. These investments drain energy that might otherwise support our own growth and relationships. We sacrifice our peace for conflicts not our own. What makes this pattern particularly problematic is how it distorts our social environment. Regular consumption of gossip creates a skewed perception that relationships are primarily characterized by conflict and betrayal. We become hypervigilant to potential slights and hidden agendas, even when none exist. This vigilance generates its own tensions, as others sense our suspicion. A self-fulfilling cycle emerges where expectation of drama helps create it. We inadvertently co-create the very dynamic we find exhausting. Caring less about others' drama doesn't mean becoming coldly disinterested in friends' genuine difficulties. It means developing discernment about when a situation warrants your emotional investment and when it doesn't. It means recognizing when sharing information serves constructive purposes versus entertainment or alliance building. When you release the tendency to emotionally engage with every conflict in your extended social circle, you create space for more meaningful support where it truly matters. Consider how much mental and emotional bandwidth is reclaimed when you step back from unnecessary involvement in others' conflicts. This energy becomes available for your own growth, creativity, and authentic connections. This shift reveals the hidden cost of drama engagement. The freedom found in caring less about others' interpersonal complications opens possibilities for a social environment characterized more by support than spectacle. Part 26. Career Progression Timing. Our professional culture establishes implicit timelines for advancement that we internalize as requirements. We believe we should reach certain positions by specific ages or within defined intervals. Falling behind these arbitrary schedules triggers anxiety and inadequacy even when our actual work brings satisfaction. We compare our pace to others rather than assessing our unique path. This pattern reveals how thoroughly we've accepted external metrics for measuring professional progress. The standardized timeline becomes more important than the actual alignment between work and personal fulfillment. This fixation on advancement timing creates several problems in our relationship with work. We pursue promotions primarily for timeline adherence rather than genuine interest in new responsibilities. We sacrifice learning opportunities that might ultimately lead to more satisfying careers, but temporarily slow visible advancement. We experience unnecessary stress about developmental periods that simply require more time for growth. These reactions transform work from a potentially meaningful domain into an anxiety-producing race against arbitrary clocks. We lose the potential satisfaction of present work to worries about future positions. What makes this pattern particularly limiting is how it ignores the increasingly non-linear nature of modern careers. Most significant professional trajectories now involve lateral moves, skill development periods, and occasional steps backward to enable larger leaps forward. Career changes at 30, 40, or 50 have become normal rather than exceptional. Multiple distinct professional chapters within a single working life represent adaptation to our rapidly changing economy. The standardized timeline increasingly fails to reflect actual career development patterns. We measure ourselves against an obsolete standard. Caring less about career progression timing doesn't mean abandoning ambition or professional development. It means recognizing that meaningful work unfolds according to its own necessary schedule rather than standardized expectations. It means prioritizing appropriate skill development and genuine interest over advancement for its own sake. When you release attachment to arbitrary professional timelines, you create space for career decisions based on authentic values rather than external pressure. Consider how many significant contributions and innovations have come from individuals whose professional paths appeared behind schedule by conventional standards. Their impact emerged precisely because they followed intrinsic interest rather than predetermined progression. This pattern reveals the hidden opportunity within non-standard timing. The freedom found in caring less about career progression schedules opens possibilities for work that feels personally meaningful, regardless of its alignment with conventional timelines. Part 27. Having the latest information. Our information ecosystem constantly generates updates, analyses, and developments across countless domains. We feel pressure to stay current with news, industry trends, cultural phenomena, and social dynamics. This expectation creates perpetual anxiety about potentially missing important information. We compulsively check devices and platforms to alleviate this fear. This pattern reveals our adaptation to an environment of information abundance without corresponding frameworks for determining what actually matters. We default to attempting to consume everything rather than selecting strategically. This compulsion creates several problems in our cognitive landscape. We experience continuous partial attention rather than deep focus on any single domain. We retain less information due to the volume and speed of consumption. We develop superficial understanding across many areas rather than meaningful depth in selected ones. These effects diminish our capacity for the sustained attention that significant contribution and creativity require. We sacrifice depth for the illusion of comprehensive awareness. What makes this pattern particularly problematic is how it misaligns with the actual relevance of most information to our lives and decisions. Research suggests that the vast majority of news and updates we consume have no practical impact on our actions or well-being. The psychic costs of constant information monitoring far exceed the practical benefits for most domains. We pay with our attention and peace of mind for information that rarely translates to meaningful difference in our lives. This exchange increasingly appears as a poor bargain. We trade the irreplaceable resource of our attention for the temporary reassurance of feeling informed. Caring less about having the latest information doesn't mean embracing ignorance or disengagement from important developments. It means becoming more intentional about which domains genuinely warrant your regular attention. It means recognizing when information consumption serves practical purpose versus temporarily alleviating FOMO. When you release the compulsion to stay updated on everything, you create space for deeper engagement with the information that genuinely matters for your specific priorities. Consider how many historical contributions to art, science, and culture emerged from individuals who focused deeply on specific domains rather than broadly across many. Their impact came through sustained attention rather than comprehensive awareness. This pattern reveals the hidden productivity of selective information engagement. The freedom found in caring less about having the latest information opens possibilities for deeper understanding where focused attention can create meaningful value. Part 28. Changing others' minds. Many of us invest substantial energy attempting to alter the beliefs, behaviors, and perspectives of others. We craft elaborate arguments, share persuasive resources, and engage in extended debates. Our conviction about the rightness of our position fuels persistent efforts to bring others to our viewpoint. This determination often intensifies when the other person actively resists our persuasion. This pattern reveals our deep-seated belief that agreement indicates relationship health and that divergent views require resolution. We struggle to peacefully coexist with fundamental differences. This fixation on changing minds creates several problems in our relationships. Conversations transform into debates with winners and losers rather than exchanges of perspective. Others sense our agenda and respond with increasing resistance rather than openness. We experience frustration and resentment when our efforts fail to produce the desired conversion. These reactions damage the underlying relationship, creating distance where we sought connection through agreement. The persuasion attempt achieves neither its explicit goal of changing minds nor its implicit goal of strengthening bonds. What makes this pattern particularly futile is how rarely direct persuasion actually works, especially on deeply held beliefs. Research consistently shows that frontal attacks on established positions typically strengthen rather than weaken them. People defend their existing perspectives more vigorously when directly challenged. Meaningful perspective shifts usually occur through personal experience and reflection rather than external argument. Our efforts at direct conversion are not just costly, but demonstrably ineffective. We continue employing an approach that evidence shows rarely succeeds. Caring less about changing others' minds doesn't mean abandoning your own convictions or becoming indifferent to important values. It means recognizing the fundamental autonomy of others to hold their own perspectives. It means shifting focus from persuasion to understanding, seeking first to fully grasp their position before expecting consideration of yours. When you release the need for others to adopt your viewpoint, you create space for relationships that accommodate difference while maintaining connection. Consider how many meaningful relationships exist despite significant differences in perspective. Family members with opposing political views who still share genuine love. Friends with different religious beliefs who respect each other's spiritual journeys. Colleagues with contrasting approaches who collaborate effectively toward shared goals. These connections reveal the possibility of unity without uniformity. The freedom found in caring less about changing minds opens possibilities for relationships characterized by mutual respect rather than mandatory agreement. Part 29. Finding Life's Single Purpose. Many of us believe we must discover our one true calling or perfect fit in life. We search for the single career, relationship, or lifestyle that will deliver complete fulfillment. This quest creates tremendous pressure to identify the right path among seemingly infinite options. We fear making wrong choices that might divert us from our proper trajectory. This pattern reveals our deep-seated desire for certainty and clear direction in an inherently ambiguous existence. We seek the comfort of a predefined purpose in a world that offers no such guarantees. This fixation on finding one's perfect purpose creates several problems in our life development. We delay meaningful commitment while waiting for complete certainty about the right choice. We experience excessive anxiety about decisions that might close off potential avenues. We interpret struggles in our chosen paths as evidence we've selected incorrectly, rather than as normal aspects of any worthwhile pursuit. These reactions prevent us from fully engaging with the opportunities directly before us. We sacrifice present meaning for the fantasy of perfect future alignment. What makes this pattern particularly limiting is how it misrepresents the actual nature of fulfilling lives. Research on career satisfaction and life meaning suggests that purpose typically emerges from engagement rather than preceding it. Meaning develops through commitment to worthy endeavors, not from discovering pre-existing perfect fits. Most fulfilled individuals retrospectively identify multiple sources of purpose rather than single callings. The expectation of a singular purpose increasingly appears not just anxiety-producing, but fundamentally misaligned with how meaningful lives actually develop. We search for what cannot be found because it doesn't exist in the form we imagine. Caring less about finding your one true purpose doesn't mean abandoning the pursuit of meaningful engagement. It means recognizing that purpose grows through action rather than emerging fully formed through revelation. It means understanding that worthy pursuits always involve difficulties that purpose helps navigate rather than eliminates. When you release the expectation of a single perfect calling, you create space for multiple forms of meaningful contribution and engagement. Consider how many impactful lives have unfolded through what appear as disconnected chapters and unexpected turns rather than straight lines toward predetermined destinations. Their significance emerged from how these individuals engaged with each chapter rather than from perfect continuity. This pattern reveals the possibility of meaning through engagement regardless of perfect fit. The freedom found in caring less about a singular purpose opens possibilities for multiple forms of contribution across life's diverse seasons. Part 30. Being universally likable. Many of us strive to be acceptable and appealing to virtually everyone we encounter. We carefully monitor how we're perceived, adjusting our expression, opinions and behavior to maximize approval. This chameleonic adaptation creates significant internal strain as we constantly shift to meet others' preferences. We experience the exhaustion of perpetual performance rather than the ease of authentic presence. This pattern reveals our deep-seated fear that our natural self might prove insufficient to secure belonging. We substitute pleasing for connecting. This fixation on universal likability creates several problems in our relationship with both others and ourselves. We present different versions to different people, creating confusion about our actual identity. We agree with conflicting opinions depending on who expresses them, creating internal cognitive dissonance. We suppress aspects of ourselves that might generate disapproval, creating painful self-alienation. These adaptations prevent the development of relationships based on genuine compatibility. We collect superficial connections rather than cultivating meaningful ones. What makes this pattern particularly futile is the fundamental impossibility of being universally liked. Human preferences, values and personalities are simply too diverse for anyone to appeal to everyone. Some people will inevitably find your authentic self incompatible with their preferences. This reality cannot be overcome through any amount of adaptation or performance. The pursuit of universal approval represents not just an exhausting goal, but an unachievable one. We strive for what cannot exist, sacrificing authenticity for an impossible ideal. Caring less about being universally liked doesn't mean becoming inconsiderate or intentionally abrasive. It means recognizing that genuine compatibility exists only with some people and situations. It means understanding that the disapproval of those with fundamentally different values represents alignment rather than failure. When you release the need for universal approval, you create space for relationships based on authentic connection rather than performance. Consider how the individuals who have most profoundly impacted culture and society have often been polarizing rather than universally palatable. Their contribution emerged precisely because they expressed distinctive perspectives rather than attempting to please everyone. This pattern reveals the hidden opportunity within the willingness to be disliked by some. The freedom found in caring less about universal approval opens possibilities for authentic expression and genuine compatibility that performance precludes. Part 31. Maintaining a young appearance. Our culture places extraordinary value on youthful appearance well into middle and later life. We're encouraged to view normal aging processes as problems requiring intervention rather than natural evolution. Entire industries profit from our anxiety about physical changes that have occurred throughout human history. Grey hair, wrinkles, and changing body composition are framed as failures requiring correction. This pattern reveals our cultural discomfort with mortality and life cycles. We attempt to visually deny the passage of time rather than finding meaning within it. This fixation on maintaining youthfulness creates several problems in our relationship with our bodies. We experience disproportionate distress about natural changes that previous generations largely accepted. We invest significant financial resources in products and procedures with often minimal results. We concentrate on appearance at the expense of more consequential aspects of health and vitality. These reactions transform aging from a universal human experience into a perpetual personal failure. We internalize shame about processes we cannot ultimately prevent. What makes this pattern particularly destructive is how it separates us from the potential meaning within life's seasons. Each stage of life offers distinct opportunities, perspectives, and forms of beauty when embraced rather than resisted. The wisdom, experience, and perspective that come with age represent gains, not just losses. Physical changes mark a life fully experienced rather than a decline to be hidden. The single-minded focus on maintaining youth obscures these potential sources of meaning. We sacrifice the unique possibilities of each life stage for the diminishing pursuit of earlier ones. Caring less about maintaining a youthful appearance doesn't mean abandoning all concern for how you present yourself. It means developing a more expansive concept of attractiveness that includes qualities beyond youth. It means recognizing that genuine vitality emerges from engagement with life rather than physical appearance alone. When you release the expectation of perpetual youthfulness, you create space for appreciation of life's evolving seasons. Consider how many cultures throughout history have associated age with wisdom, respect, and distinctive forms of beauty. Our current youth obsession represents a historical anomaly rather than a universal human value. This perspective reveals the cultural rather than inevitable nature of our age anxiety. The freedom found in caring less about maintaining youth opens possibilities for meaning and beauty at every life stage. Part 32. Perfect documentation of experiences. Our digital era has created unprecedented capacity to record and share our experiences. We feel increasing pressure to comprehensively document significant moments through photos, videos, and social media posts. This impulse transforms experiences from events to be lived into content to be captured. The camera or phone becomes a mediating device between ourselves and direct experience. This pattern reveals our growing anxiety about memory preservation and social validation. We sacrifice immediate immersion for the perception of permanence. This fixation on documentation creates several problems in our relationship with experience. We fragment attention between participation and recording, diminishing our presence in meaningful moments. We experience social pressure to display experiences in specific ways, adding performance anxiety to what might otherwise be natural engagement. We filter events through their shareability and aesthetic potential rather than their direct impact. These adaptations fundamentally alter the quality of our presence in our own lives. We become spectators rather than full participants. What makes this pattern particularly ironic is how it often fails, even on its own terms. Research suggests that excessive photo-taking actually impairs memory formation rather than enhancing it. The divided attention prevents the deep encoding that creates lasting recollection. The documentation designed to preserve memory actually diminishes it. Meanwhile, the vast archives of digital photos many accumulate rarely receive the revisiting that would justify their creation. We capture more than we could ever meaningfully review. Caring less about perfect documentation doesn't mean abandoning all recording of significant experiences. It means becoming more intentional about when and how much to document versus when to simply be present. It means recognizing that the most meaningful aspects of experience often resist capture through external devices. When you release the compulsion for comprehensive documentation, you create space for the full sensory and emotional engagement that creates genuine memory. Consider that the most vivid memories from childhood typically come from experiences that occurred before the ubiquity of documentation devices. These recollections persist through the deep neural encoding that comes from full presence. This pattern reveals the hidden relationship between attention and memory. The freedom found in caring less about perfect documentation opens possibilities for experiences characterized by immersion rather than division. Part 33. Your personal timeline. Many of us develop rigid expectations about when specific life events should occur. Marriage by a certain age, career milestones by specific points, children within defined windows. We treat these arbitrary timelines as requirements rather than preferences. Deviation from these schedules triggers anxiety and inadequacy even when our actual circumstances bring satisfaction. This pattern reveals our deep desire for certainty and control in inherently unpredictable life development. We create artificial deadlines to manage the fundamental uncertainty of human existence. This fixation on personal timelines creates several problems in our life satisfaction. We rush important decisions to meet arbitrary deadlines rather than allowing proper discernment. We compare our timing to others rather than assessing our unique circumstances and needs. We experience disappointment about timing misalignments, even amid otherwise fulfilling developments. These reactions transform natural life variation into perceived failure. We judge our lives by their conformity to schedule rather than their authentic unfolding. What makes this pattern particularly problematic is how dramatically it misaligns with the increasing diversity of modern life trajectories. People now regularly begin new careers in their 40s, become parents in their 20s or 40s, find partnership at various ages, or create unconventional life structures entirely. These varied paths reflect adaptation to changing economic conditions, social structures, and personal awareness. The standardized timeline increasingly fails to reflect the actual diversity of fulfilling lives. We measure ourselves against templates that no longer serve as useful guides. The map no longer corresponds to the territory of contemporary life. Caring less about personal timelines doesn't mean abandoning intentionality or drifting without direction. It means developing greater flexibility about when various life developments occur. It means recognizing that meaningful lives unfold in patterns as unique as the individuals living them. When you release attachment to arbitrary timing, you create space for decisions based on actual readiness and circumstance, rather than calendar pressure. Consider how many celebrated lives have unfolded along non-standard timelines. Careers begun later in life, relationships found after conventional windows, and contributions made in unexpected seasons. These examples reveal the possibility of meaning and fulfillment on unique schedules. The freedom found in caring less about personal timelines opens possibilities for a life guided by authentic readiness rather than external expectations. Part 34. Digital communication norms. Modern digital communication has evolved increasingly rigid expectations around response timing and availability. We feel pressure to reply rapidly to messages across multiple platforms regardless of our current activities. Read receipts, online status indicators, and last-seen timestamps create surveillance mechanisms that generate anxiety. Delayed responses require explanation or apology even when the delay reflects appropriate boundaries. This pattern reveals our cultural slide toward expected continuous availability. Personal accessibility has transformed from occasional to perpetual. This fixation on immediate digital responsiveness creates several problems in our attention and relationships. We fragment focus on important tasks to maintain rapid message turnaround. We experience anxiety when temporarily disconnecting for restoration or concentrated work. We interpret others' delayed responses as personal rejection rather than normal boundary setting. These reactions transform communication tools from conveniences to obligations. What began as technologies to serve us gradually become masters we serve. What makes this pattern particularly problematic is how it misaligns with the cognitive requirements for meaningful work and relationships. Complex thinking, creative insight, and deep connection all require sustained attention without fragmentation. The continuous partial attention created by constant message monitoring prevents the depth that significance requires. We sacrifice quality of both work and connection to maintain the appearance of perpetual availability. This represents a particularly poor trade, exchanging what matters most for what matters least. We choose the urgent over the important by default. Caring less about digital communication norms doesn't mean becoming unreliable or unreachable. It means establishing more sustainable boundaries based on your actual priorities rather than platform defaults. It means recognizing when immediate availability serves meaningful connection versus when it simply alleviates social anxiety. When you release adherence to artificial response expectations, you create space for both deeper work and more present connection. Consider how the most meaningful conversations and creative breakthroughs typically occur during periods of focused attention rather than fractured availability. These moments reveal the hidden productivity of communication boundaries. The capacity for depth requires the willingness to be temporarily unavailable. The freedom found in caring less about digital responsiveness opens possibilities for both work and relationships, characterized by quality rather than mere frequency. Part 35. The Future Self-Fantasy. Many of us engage in a peculiar form of magical thinking about our future selves. We imagine that the person we'll become tomorrow will somehow possess motivation, discipline, and capacity that we ourselves lack today. This future self will eagerly tackle the difficult tasks we're currently avoiding. They'll happily wake early, choose the healthier option, and complete challenging work with enthusiasm. This pattern reveals our tendency to dissociate from continuity of identity when facing difficult choices. We treat our future self as a separate, superior entity rather than our actual self in a different moment. This fixation on the future self creates several problems in our present decisions. We defer important actions based on the fantasy that they'll be easier later. We overcommit future time and energy, creating eventual overwhelm and disappointment. We make choices that benefit present comfort at the expense of future well-being. These patterns create cascading difficulties, as each day's postponed challenges accumulate for a future self who remains just as human and limited as our present self. We consistently overestimate future capacity while underestimating future resistance. What makes this pattern particularly destructive is how it creates a perpetual cycle of self-betrayal. We make implicit promises to ourselves that we then break, eroding self-trust with each deferral. This diminishing confidence in our follow-through capabilities creates increasing hesitation to commit to meaningful change. We develop a relationship with ourselves characterized by disappointment and skepticism rather than reliability. The future self-fantasy gradually transforms from motivation to demotivation as we repeatedly experience its failure. Hope gives way to resignation as patterns repeat. Caring less about the future self-fantasy doesn't mean abandoning planning or aspirational thinking. It means developing a more realistic relationship with the actual continuity of self across time. It means recognizing that the future you will face the same fundamental resistances and limitations as the present you. When you release magical thinking about your future capabilities, you create space for more sustainable approaches to change and commitment. Consider that the most reliable predictor of future behavior is not wishful thinking, but present habits. This reality reveals the importance of small, sustainable actions now versus grand plans for later. The path to change lies not in imagining a different self, but in making slightly different choices with the self you already are. The freedom found in caring less about the future self-fantasy opens possibilities for realistic growth based on genuine self-understanding rather than self-deception. Part 36. Cultural Obsession with Youth. Beyond personal appearance, our society demonstrates a broader fixation on youth culture in virtually every domain. We valorize young innovators, celebrate youthful perspectives, and orient entertainment primarily toward younger audiences. Older voices fade from prominence regardless of their wisdom or continued contribution. Experience becomes less valued than novelty and disruption. This pattern reveals our collective anxiety about mortality and our misidentification of youth with relevance. We collectively retreat from the wisdom that accompanies life experience. This cultural youth obsession creates several problems in our societal development. We repeatedly discard accumulated knowledge, forcing each generation to rediscover wisdom through painful trial and error. We devalue the perspectives of those who have witnessed multiple cycles of history and can recognize patterns invisible to younger observers. We create artificial generational division rather than continuity of knowledge transfer. These patterns diminish our collective decision-making capacity and fragment our cultural coherence. We sacrifice depth for the appearance of dynamism. What makes this pattern particularly troubling is how it contradicts the actual mechanics of wisdom development. Certain forms of understanding genuinely require the passage of time and accumulation of diverse experiences. The capacity to recognize patterns across decades, to maintain equanimity amid chaos, to distinguish genuine innovation from recycled ideas with new packaging. These capabilities typically develop through sustained engagement with life rather than inherent brilliance. By systematically devaluing these forms of knowledge, we deprive ourselves of essential perspectives for navigating complexity. We mistake information access for the wisdom to properly interpret it. Caring less about the cultural youth obsession doesn't mean rejecting innovation or dismissing younger perspectives. It means developing a more balanced valuation of contribution across life stages. It means recognizing the unique and complementary forms of insight that different generational perspectives can offer. When you release the reflex to prioritize youth in all domains, you create space for intergenerational collaboration that leverages the strengths of each life stage. Consider how the most resilient cultural traditions throughout history have balanced innovation with continuity, integrating new perspectives while preserving accumulated wisdom. These systems reveal the possibility of progress without amnesia. The most sophisticated understandings emerge not from fetishizing either youth or age exclusively, but from their thoughtful integration. The freedom found in caring less about youth obsession opens possibilities for cultural development that builds upon foundations, rather than constantly starting from scratch. Part 37. Endless self-improvement. Our contemporary culture promotes the idea that we should constantly be optimizing every aspect of ourselves. Productivity, fitness, nutrition, sleep, relationships, hobbies. Nothing is exempt from the imperative to continuously improve, optimize, and maximize. Even our leisure must be educational or developmental. This pattern reveals our deep discomfort with being rather than becoming. We've internalized the message that our current state is perpetually insufficient. This fixation on endless self-improvement creates several problems in our relationship with ourselves. We experience chronic dissatisfaction as the goalposts continuously move beyond our reach. We judge natural human inconsistency as moral failure rather than normal variation. We exhaust ourselves pursuing contradictory ideals across too many domains simultaneously. These reactions transform life from a journey to be experienced into a project to be perfected. The human being becomes a perpetual work in progress, never quite arriving at adequacy. What makes this pattern particularly exhausting is its fundamental incompleteness by design. The improvement imperative acknowledges no natural endpoint or state of sufficiency. No matter what level of development we achieve, more optimization always remains possible. This creates the conditions for perpetual striving without satisfaction. The goal isn't to reach a destination but to maintain constant movement regardless of direction or necessity. We measure ourselves by our commitment to improvement rather than by any meaningful outcome of that improvement. Caring less about endless self-improvement doesn't mean embracing complacency or rejecting growth. It means developing a more balanced relationship with both acceptance and development. It means recognizing when further optimization serves meaningful purpose versus when it merely alleviates the discomfort of being as you are. When you release the compulsion for perpetual improvement, you create space for genuine appreciation of your current capabilities and qualities. Consider that the most contented individuals typically balance commitment to growth with genuine acceptance of current reality. They pursue development in selected domains while practicing radical acceptance in others. This integration reveals the possibility of purposeful growth without chronic dissatisfaction. The freedom found in caring less about endless self-improvement opens possibilities for both meaningful development and authentic self-acceptance. Part 38. Getting credit for your work. Many of us attach significant importance to receiving proper acknowledgement for our contributions. We feel frustrated when others fail to recognize our efforts or when credit goes to someone else. This desire for recognition extends beyond fair compensation to a deeper need for validation of our worth through external affirmation. We experience disproportionate emotional responses when this recognition doesn't materialize. This pattern reveals our conflation of contribution with identity. The work becomes not just what we do, but who we are. This fixation on receiving credit creates several problems in our work life. We hesitate to contribute to projects where our specific input might not be identifiable. We feel resentment toward colleagues or leaders who receive recognition for collective achievements. We make decisions based on visibility rather than actual impact. These reactions diminish both our collaboration capacity and our satisfaction from the work itself. The preoccupation with recognition overshadows the inherent meaning of contribution. What makes this pattern particularly limiting is how it misaligns with how consequential work actually happens. Most significant achievements result from collective effort where individual contributions cannot be neatly separated. The most important work often happens invisibly, creating foundations upon which more visible contributions can build. The obsession with individual credit fails to acknowledge this fundamental interconnectedness. We cling to a myth of individual achievement that rarely reflects reality. The insistence on recognition often prevents the very kinds of collaboration that enable the most meaningful work. Caring less about getting credit doesn't mean allowing exploitation or failing to advocate for fair compensation. It means separating the practical aspects of recognition from the emotional attachment to external validation. It means finding satisfaction in contribution itself, rather than exclusively in its acknowledgement. When you release the need for others to affirm your importance, you create space for work motivated by intrinsic meaning rather than external validation. Consider how many of humanity's most significant contributions have come from individuals who worked in relative obscurity, motivated by commitment to a purpose larger than personal recognition. Scientific breakthroughs, artistic masterpieces and social advances that emerged from dedication to the work itself. This pattern reveals the possibility of meaning beyond acknowledgement. The freedom found in caring less about credit opens possibilities for contribution unconstrained by the need for personal validation. Part 39. Everyone's approval. We often unconsciously operate with the expectation that our decisions should meet with universal approval from those around us. We feel distress when family members question our choices, friends express concerns, or colleagues disagree with our approaches. This desire for consensus support reveals our deep need for external validation of our judgment. We struggle to trust our own discernment when it generates mixed reactions from others. This pattern reveals our discomfort with the inherent complexity of significant decisions. We seek simplification through unanimous endorsement. This fixation on universal approval creates several problems in our decision-making. We delay important choices while seeking impossible consensus. We water down distinctive approaches to accommodate conflicting perspectives. We experience unjustified doubt when even a single respected voice questions our direction. These reactions prevent the clarity and conviction that meaningful action requires. We substitute external confirmation for internal alignment. What makes this pattern particularly paralyzing is the fundamental impossibility of pleasing everyone. Any significant decision will inevitably generate mixed responses due to the diverse perspectives, values, and priorities of those around us. What appears clearly right to some will seem obviously misguided to others. This divergence reflects not poor decision-making, but the inherent complexity of life and the legitimacy of different viewpoints. The expectation of universal approval represents not just an unlikely outcome, but an impossible one. We wait for what cannot exist. Caring less about everyone's approval doesn't mean becoming indifferent to thoughtful feedback or dismissing legitimate concerns. It means recognizing that unanimous endorsement is neither possible nor necessary for sound decisions. It means developing greater trust in your own judgment while remaining open to perspective without being paralyzed by it. When you release the need for universal approval, you create space for decisions aligned with your core values rather than aimed at managing others' reactions. Consider that virtually every significant innovation, creative breakthrough or social advance initially generated mixed or negative reactions. The most consequential paths often begin with resistance rather than unanimous support. This pattern reveals the relationship between distinctive contribution and divided opinion. The freedom found in caring less about universal approval opens possibilities for decisions guided by conviction rather than consensus. Part 40. Imaginary judgment. We frequently attribute critical thoughts to others without actual evidence of their thinking. We believe the stranger noticed our awkward comment, the colleague is judging our presentation skills, the acquaintance is evaluating our appearance. These imagined judgments feel real despite existing only in our minds. We react emotionally to these projections as if they were confirmed realities. This pattern reveals our tendency to populate the world with critics far harsher than most actual people. We create phantom judges more severe than those we truly encounter. This fixation on imagined judgment creates several problems in our social experience. We feel unnecessary shame about actions or qualities that others may not have even noticed. We modify our behavior to appease critics who exist only in our imagination. We experience social anxiety disproportionate to actual social risk. These reactions diminish our authentic expression and create suffering without external cause. We punish ourselves for transgressions no one else is actually tracking. What makes this pattern particularly destructive is how thoroughly it misrepresents others' actual attention patterns. Research consistently shows that people are far more focused on themselves than on observing others. The phenomenon psychologists call the spotlight effect demonstrates how dramatically we overestimate how much others notice and remember about our actions. The stranger is likely too absorbed in their own thoughts to register your comment. The colleague is probably worrying about their own presentation rather than critiquing yours. The acquaintance may barely have registered your appearance while navigating their own insecurities. Caring less about imaginary judgment doesn't mean becoming oblivious to actual social feedback. It means developing more realistic assessments of how much attention others are actually giving your perceived flaws or mistakes. It means recognizing when your assumed critics exist primarily in your own mind. When you release preoccupation with imagined judgment, you create space for more accurate interpretation of social reality. Consider how many of your own memories of others involve noting and remembering their mistakes or imperfections. The relative scarcity of such memories reveals the asymmetry between how we imagine others judge us and how we actually judge them. This reality check offers perspective on how infrequently others are actually maintaining the mental record of our flaws that we imagine. The freedom found in caring less about imaginary judgment opens possibilities for social engagement based on actual rather than projected responses. Part 41. Maintaining a perfect environment. Many of us develop precise expectations about our physical surroundings. We feel genuine distress when our homes, workspaces or possessions fail to meet our standards of order and aesthetics. Unwashed dishes, misaligned objects or cluttered surfaces create disproportionate emotional responses. We experience these imperfections not as minor variations, but as meaningful failures. This pattern reveals our attempt to create islands of perfect control within an inherently unpredictable existence. We establish domain over what can be ordered when much of life cannot. This fixation on environmental perfection creates several problems in our daily experience. We devote excessive time to maintenance tasks that yield diminishing returns in actual functionality. We experience unnecessary stress when others fail to maintain our precise standards. We delay relaxation or creativity until the environment reaches a level of order it rarely achieves. These reactions transform spaces from enablers of living into obligations requiring constant attention. The environment becomes a taskmaster rather than a support for meaningful activity. What makes this pattern particularly limiting is how it restricts spontaneity and presence. The concern with maintaining perfect order creates hesitation around activities that naturally generate temporary disorder. Creative projects, meal preparation, children's play, and other meaningful pursuits inevitably disrupt environmental perfection. When these activities trigger anxiety rather than engagement, we gradually narrow our range of experience. The spaces theoretically optimized for living become increasingly unused for actual living. We create showrooms rather than living spaces. Caring less about environmental perfection doesn't mean embracing squalor or complete disorder. It means developing more flexible standards that prioritize functionality and joy over rigid aesthetics. It means recognizing when order serves life and when it constrains it. When you release excessive attachment to perfect environments, you create space for the natural disorder that accompanies engaged living. Consider that virtually every meaningful human activity temporarily disrupts perfect order. The shared meal leaves dishes, the creative project generates materials, the gathering of friends rearranges furniture. This pattern reveals the hidden relationship between engagement and imperfection. The freedom found in caring less about environmental perfection opens possibilities for spaces that genuinely support life rather than merely displaying order. Part 42. Being the exception. Many of us harbour the peculiar belief that general statistical patterns apply to others, but not to ourselves. We acknowledge the risks of certain behaviours while simultaneously believing we'll somehow avoid the consequences. The smoker who won't get cancer, the investor who can time the market, the driver who texts safely. We attribute others' negative outcomes to their personal failings rather than systemic patterns that equally apply to us. This pattern reveals our deep-seated resistance to perceiving ourselves as subject to the same limitations and vulnerabilities as others. We create fictional exceptionalism to manage existential anxiety. This fixation on personal exception creates several problems in our decision-making. We take unnecessary risks based on the fantasy of immunity to statistical realities. We develop inadequate contingency plans due to underestimated vulnerability. We experience shock and disbelief when negative outcomes affect us despite clear warning patterns. These reactions leave us unprepared for setbacks that could have been anticipated through realistic risk assessment. We sacrifice prudence for the psychological comfort of imagined exception. What makes this pattern particularly dangerous is how thoroughly it misaligns with actual reality. Statistical patterns exist precisely because they describe general tendencies that apply broadly across populations. While individual variation exists, the belief in personal immunity to established patterns represents magical thinking rather than reasonable optimism. This distortion leads to systematically poor decisions across numerous life domains. The conviction of exception persists specifically because we notice the rare cases that confirm it while ignoring the overwhelming evidence that contradicts it. We maintain the comforting delusion through selective attention. Caring less about being the exception doesn't mean adopting pessimism or abandoning appropriate confidence. It means developing more realistic assessment of how general patterns likely apply to your specific situation. It means recognizing when exception beliefs serve as psychological comfort rather than reasoned analysis. When you release attachment to fictional exceptionalism, you create space for decisions grounded in actual rather than imagined probabilities. Consider how many regrettable outcomes in your past resulted from the conviction that warnings applied to others but not to you. The relationship red flags dismissed, the health practices ignored, the financial risks minimized. This reflection reveals the hidden cost of exception thinking. The freedom found in caring less about being the exception opens possibilities for choices aligned with actual rather than imagined odds. Part 43. Living up to your potential. From childhood, many of us have been haunted by the concept of unfulfilled potential. Parents, teachers, and mentors identified capabilities they believed we should fully develop. This external assessment gradually became internalized as an obligation to maximize every capacity we might possess. Any talent left unpursued becomes reframed as a moral failing. This pattern reveals our deep discomfort with the necessary selectivity of finite human lives. We resist the reality that actualization in some areas requires abandonment of others. This fixation on maximizing potential creates several problems in our life development. We experience persistent guilt about skills or interests we've chosen not to prioritize. We spread attention too thinly across too many domains to achieve depth in any. We judge our actual achievements against an impossible fantasy of what might have been with perfect development. These reactions prevent both the satisfaction of meaningful accomplishment and the peace of conscious limitation. We remain caught between inadequate breadth and insufficient depth. What makes this pattern particularly troubling is how it misrepresents the actual nature of human development. Meaningful achievement in any domain requires not just talent, but substantial time investment and opportunity cost. The concert pianist sacrifices the potential surgeon, the dedicated parent forgoes certain career achievements, the specialist relinquishes breadth for depth. These trade-offs represent not failure, but the necessary reality of finite time and attention. The idealization of universal potential fulfillment denies these fundamental constraints. We demand the impossible, then suffer when we inevitably fall short. Caring less about living up to your potential doesn't mean abandoning excellence or meaningful development. It means recognizing that selectivity represents wisdom rather than failure in a finite life. It means understanding that unrealized capacities are not moral failings, but necessary consequences of meaningful commitment. When you release the obligation to maximize every possible talent, you create space for depth in what matters most to you specifically. Consider how virtually every individual admired for exceptional achievement in any domain necessarily left other potentials undeveloped. The focus that enabled their mastery required the deliberate neglect of other capacities. This pattern reveals the relationship between meaningful achievement and conscious limitation. The freedom found in caring less about universal potential opens possibilities for the depth that comes through selective rather than dispersed attention. Part 44. Unbroken Streaks. Many of us become fixated on maintaining uninterrupted sequences of behavior. Exercise routines, meditation practices, learning programs, or productivity systems. We assign disproportionate significance to maintaining perfect continuity in these patterns. A single missed day triggers emotions far beyond the actual impact of the interruption. This pattern reveals our tendency to transform means into ends, where the record-keeping becomes more important than the purpose it was meant to serve. The streak itself becomes sacred, obscuring its original function. This fixation on unbroken streaks creates several problems in our relationship with habits. We continue practices even when ill, injured, or genuinely needing rest. We experience unnecessary shame and discouragement when inevitably interruptions occur. We abandon beneficial habits entirely after breaks, rather than simply resuming them. These reactions transform potentially supportive practices into sources of rigidity and self-punishment. The structure designed to enable flourishing becomes constricting rather than liberating. What makes this pattern particularly counterproductive is how it fundamentally misunderstands sustainable habit formation. Research consistently shows that the most enduring habits accommodate rather than deny the natural variability of human life. The capacity to resume after interruption proves more valuable for long-term consistency than unbroken perfection. Resilience, not perfection, characterizes truly sustainable practices. The streak mentality paradoxically creates the conditions for complete abandonment rather than genuine integration. The all-or-nothing approach guarantees eventual nothing. Caring less about unbroken streaks doesn't mean becoming uncommitted or inconsistent. It means developing a more resilient relationship with consistency that accommodates normal life variation. It means recognizing that the purpose of structure is to support flourishing, rather than to become another source of self-judgment. When you release attachment to perfect continuity, you create space for the resilience that sustainable practice actually requires. Consider how many beneficial practices throughout your life have followed patterns of engagement, interruption, and re-engagement. The learning process that included breaks, the creative practice that ebbed and flowed, the exercise routine that accommodated recovery periods. This reflection reveals the natural rhythm of sustainable development. The freedom found in caring less about unbroken streaks opens possibilities for practices that bend without breaking when life inevitably varies. Part 45. Regrettable Purchases. Many of us experience disproportionate distress when we realize a purchase was misguided. The expensive item rarely used, the subscription that provides little value, the clothing that remains unworn. We feel not just financial disappointment, but a deeper sense of personal failure or foolishness. The mistake becomes evidence of poor judgment extending beyond the specific purchase. This pattern reveals our tendency to assess decisions primarily by outcomes rather than by the quality of the decision process given the information available at the time. We judge past choices with information unavailable when the choice was made. This fixation on purchase perfection creates several problems in our relationship with resources. We experience lingering negative emotions that far exceed the actual financial impact. We delay necessary decisions due to fear of potential regret. We keep suboptimal items to avoid acknowledging the error. These reactions compound the original mistake by adding emotional suffering and continued resource misdirection. The emotional processing becomes more costly than the financial error. What makes this pattern particularly unproductive is how it fails to acknowledge the inherent uncertainty in virtually all purchasing decisions. Even the most carefully researched choices involve unpredictable variables about how items will actually integrate into our lives. Usage patterns, personal preferences and circumstances change in ways difficult to anticipate. Some percentage of purchase mistakes represents not poor judgment, but the unavoidable result of decision-making under uncertainty. The expectation of perfect foresight denies this fundamental reality. We demand of ourselves an impossible standard of predictive accuracy. Caring less about regrettable purchases doesn't mean becoming financially irresponsible or indifferent to waste. It means developing a more balanced emotional response proportionate to the actual impact. It means recognizing purchase mistakes as normal learning experiences rather than profound character indictments. When you release excessive attachment to purchase perfection, you create space for the learning that mistakes make possible without unnecessary suffering. Consider how many significant innovations and discoveries throughout history emerged from what initially appeared as errors or misdirections. The mistake that revealed an unexpected property or application. This pattern reveals the hidden opportunity within apparent missteps. The freedom found in caring less about perfect purchasing opens possibilities for viewing consumer errors as data rather than failures. Part 46. Winning every argument. Many of us approach disagreements as contests that must be definitively won. We marshal evidence, craft persuasive points and counter objections with mounting intensity. The goal becomes securing the other person's admission of error or acceptance of our position. We experience genuine frustration when this victory remains elusive despite our seemingly irrefutable points. This pattern reveals our tendency to approach differences as zero-sum competitions rather than opportunities for mutual understanding. We measure success by conquest rather than comprehension. This fixation on argumentative victory creates several problems in our relationships. We listen to formulate rebuttals rather than to understand perspectives. We escalate emotional intensity in ways that trigger defensive responses rather than openness. We damage connection in pursuit of being proven right. These reactions transform what could be illuminating exchanges into battles that diminish trust regardless of outcome. Even when we win, we often lose something more valuable in the process. What makes this pattern particularly destructive is how it fundamentally misunderstands how perspective change typically occurs. Research consistently shows that people rarely alter views through direct confrontation or defeat in argument. Meaningful shifts usually happen privately, after reflection, when not under the pressure of social performance or threat to identity. The confrontational approach that feels satisfying actually reduces the likelihood of the perspective change we seek. Our tactical satisfaction undermines our strategic goals. We win battles while losing wars. Caring less about winning arguments doesn't mean abandoning conviction or becoming intellectually passive. It means shifting focus from victory to understanding, prioritizing comprehension before persuasion. It means recognizing that influence flows from connection rather than domination. When you release the need to secure explicit surrender or agreement, you create space for exchanges that might genuinely shift understanding for both parties. Consider how many of your own significant perspective changes occurred, not when someone defeated you in argument, but when you felt genuinely heard and respected despite disagreement. The space to shift without losing face or identity. This reflection reveals the paradoxical effectiveness of relinquishing argumentative victory. The freedom found in caring less about winning every point opens possibilities for the influence that comes through understanding rather than domination. Part 47. Sunk Costs. Many of us struggle to abandon paths we've already invested in, regardless of future prospects. The unfulfilling career pursued due to years of education, the deteriorating relationship maintained because of time invested, the unread books kept because they were purchased. We experience powerful resistance to acknowledging that previous investments cannot be recovered. The prospect of wasting past expenditures of time, energy, or resources feels genuinely painful. This pattern reveals our tendency to make current decisions based on recovering past investments rather than on creating future value. We look backward when we should be looking forward. This fixation on sunk costs creates several problems in our decision-making. We remain in suboptimal situations far longer than serves our well-being. We experience ongoing dissatisfaction while rationalizing it as necessary persistence. We forego superior alternatives due to overcounting prior investments. These reactions transform past choices from experiences to learn from into anchors that restrict current freedom. Previous decisions gain inappropriate power over present possibilities. What makes this pattern particularly limiting is how it fundamentally misunderstands the actual relationship between past expenditures and future outcomes. Prior investments, regardless of magnitude, cannot be recovered through continued commitment to failing endeavors. The resources already expended are gone, whether the path is continued or abandoned. The only relevant factors for current decisions are future prospects and opportunity costs. The backward orientation prevents clear assessment of forward possibilities. We sacrifice potential for a misconceived attempt to justify the past. Caring less about sunk costs doesn't mean becoming fickle or easily discouraged. It means evaluating current decisions based on future prospects rather than past investments. It means recognizing when persistence represents wisdom versus attachment to irrecoverable expenditures. When you release excessive concern about wasting previous investments, you create space for decisions aligned with current realities rather than past allocations. Consider how many significant life improvements have come precisely through the courage to abandon heavily invested paths that no longer served their purpose. The career change that appeared to waste education, the relationship ended despite years invested, the project abandoned despite substantial resources committed. This pattern reveals the hidden opportunity within the willingness to acknowledge when continued investment no longer makes sense. The freedom found in caring less about sunk costs opens possibilities for decisions based on future potential rather than past expenditure. Part 48. Following through on everything. Many of us feel intense obligation to complete any task, project or commitment we've begun. The book we stopped enjoying, the hobby that no longer engages us, the volunteering that drains rather than energizes. We experience genuine guilt about abandoning these activities, viewing non-completion as a character flaw. The drive to follow through persists even when the original purpose has become irrelevant. This pattern reveals our tendency to elevate consistency above adaptability, treating follow-through as an absolute virtue rather than a contextual one. Completion becomes a moral imperative regardless of changing circumstances or realized value. This fixation on universal follow-through creates several problems in our resource allocation. We continue investing in low-value activities at the expense of higher-value possibilities. We experience resentment and drudgery while executing obligations that no longer align with our priorities. We hesitate to begin potentially valuable endeavors due to fear of accumulating more completion burden. These reactions transform what should be a selective principle into a restrictive absolute. The virtue designed to support reliability becomes an obstacle to appropriate adaptation. What makes this pattern particularly problematic is how it fails to acknowledge the necessary selectivity required in a world of finite resources. Every minute, dollar, and unit of attention allocated to completing low-value commitments represents opportunity cost for potentially higher-value activities. As circumstances, information, and priorities naturally evolve, rigid adherence to past commitments increasingly misaligns resource allocation with actual value. The principled refusal to reassess and redirect guarantees increasing inefficiency. We optimize for a past that no longer exists at the expense of the present that does. The completion imperative becomes increasingly divorced from its original purpose of effective resource direction. Caring less about universal follow-through doesn't mean becoming unreliable or abandoning appropriate persistence. It means developing more nuanced discernment about when completion serves actual value versus when it merely satisfies an abstract principle. It means recognizing that strategic incompletion often serves greater purpose than indiscriminate follow-through. When you release excessive attachment to finishing everything you start, you create space for the adaptability that changing circumstances require. Consider how many of history's most significant contributions emerged from the willingness to abandon initial directions when more promising paths became apparent. The research project that shifted focus, the business that pivoted strategy, the creative work that evolved beyond its original concept. This pattern reveals the relationship between selective incompletion and meaningful achievement. The freedom found in caring less about finishing everything opens possibilities for directing finite resources toward what actually matters most now, regardless of previous commitment. Part 49. Having a consistent identity. Many of us feel pressure to present a completely consistent persona across time and social contexts. We experience discomfort when our preferences, beliefs, or behaviors evolve or vary in different situations. Changes in perspective trigger anxieties about authenticity or concerns about perceived hypocrisy. We maintain outdated self-concepts long after they've ceased to serve us. This pattern reveals our struggle with the inherent fluidity of genuine human development. We mistake rigidity for integrity. This fixation on absolute consistency creates several problems in our personal growth. We resist updating beliefs when new information warrants reconsideration. We maintain behaviors aligned with outdated self-images rather than current needs. We experience unnecessary internal conflict when natural contextual variations emerge in our responses. These reactions transform identity from a flexible, evolving narrative into a rigid constraint. The self-concept designed to create coherence becomes a limitation on legitimate development. What makes this pattern particularly limiting is how deeply it misaligns with the actual nature of healthy human development. Psychological research consistently shows that well-adjusted individuals demonstrate appropriate context sensitivity and ongoing integration of new experiences. Rigidity of identity correlates more strongly with dysfunction than with well-being. The capacity to evolve perspectives, incorporate new information, and adapt to changing circumstances represents psychological health rather than deficiency. The demand for perfect consistency contradicts how human minds naturally function at their best. We strive for what would actually indicate psychological limitation rather than strength. Caring less about absolute consistency doesn't mean abandoning core values or becoming chaotically unpredictable. It means developing a more fluid understanding of identity that accommodates growth, context, sensitivity, and evolution. It means recognizing that integrity exists in how we integrate new understanding rather than in how rigidly we maintain past positions. When you release excessive attachment to perfect consistency, you create space for the natural evolution that meaningful development requires. Consider how many admired individuals have publicly evolved their perspectives on significant issues throughout their lives. The political figure who shifted position based on new evidence, the scientist who abandoned previous theories when data contradicted them, the moral leader whose understanding deepened through experience. These examples reveal the relationship between willingness to evolve and meaningful contribution. The freedom found in caring less about perfect consistency opens possibilities for ongoing integration that static identity precludes. Part 50. Job titles and professional labels. Many of us assign excessive significance to our formal professional designations. We derive substantial identity from being a director, manager, specialist, or whatever title we've achieved. These labels become crucial components of how we understand ourselves and present to others. We experience genuine distress when organizational changes alter these designations. This pattern reveals our tendency to conflate administrative categories with personal identity and worth. The organizational convenience becomes existentially meaningful through misplaced attachment. This fixation on professional titles creates several problems in our relationship with work. We pursue promotions for their labels rather than for their actual content or alignment with our strengths. We resist lateral moves that might better serve our development but carry less impressive designations. We experience disproportionate emotion when reorganizations change reporting structures or classifications. These reactions transform bureaucratic conveniences into inappropriate sources of self-concept. The administrative becomes existential. What makes this pattern particularly problematic is how it fundamentally misunderstands the relationship between organizational labels and meaningful contribution. Job titles represent simplifications designed primarily for organizational convenience rather than accurate descriptions of complex individual capabilities. They typically capture narrow aspects of function while ignoring the unique constellation of strengths, perspectives, and approaches that constitute actual individual contribution. The reduction of rich human capacity to standardized categories necessarily distorts more than it reveals. The attachment to these simplified labels constrains rather than enhances self-understanding. We mistake the map for the territory. Caring less about professional titles doesn't mean becoming uncommitted to excellence or professional development. It means locating identity more in the quality and impact of your contribution than in its administrative classification. It means recognizing that your unique value transcends whatever standardized category currently describes your role. When you release excessive attachment to formal designations, you create space for professional decisions based on meaningful engagement rather than status markers. Consider how many of the most significant contributions to fields have come from individuals working outside conventional titles or across traditional categories. The innovations that emerged precisely because someone was willing to transcend the limitations of formal designation. This pattern reveals the relationship between categorical flexibility and meaningful impact. The freedom found in caring less about professional labels opens possibilities for contributions defined by substance rather than classification. Part 51. Reaching Inbox Zero. Many of us experience disproportionate anxiety about maintaining completely processed communication channels. Unread emails, unheard voicemails, unreviewed messages across various platforms. We feel genuine unease at indicators showing unprocessed items awaiting attention. The notification badges create a sense of uncompleted obligation that follows us throughout our day. This pattern reveals our tendency to treat communication management as a moral imperative rather than a practical necessity. The administrative task becomes confused with personal virtue. This fixation on communication processing creates several problems in our attention management. We interrupt focused work to address incoming messages regardless of their importance. We allow lower-value communications to consume time needed for higher-value creation. We experience continuous low-grade anxiety about message backlogs that's disproportionate to their actual significance. These reactions transform tools designed to serve our purposes into sources of persistent distraction and stress. The servant becomes the master. What makes this pattern particularly problematic is how fundamentally it misaligns with the reality of modern communication volume. The sheer quantity of incoming messages across multiple platforms has long exceeded most people's capacity for complete processing while maintaining other responsibilities. The expectation of comprehensive review represents not just a time management challenge but a mathematical impossibility for many roles. Complete processing would consume the majority of available work hours, preventing the substantive contribution the role actually requires. The Inbox Zero ideal increasingly represents not admirable discipline, but misplaced prioritization. We optimize for an administrative goal at the expense of actual impact. Caring less about complete communication processing doesn't mean becoming irresponsible or unresponsive. It means developing more strategic approaches to message management based on actual importance rather than mere presence. It means recognizing when the pursuit of Inbox Zero represents productive organization versus anxiety management. When you release excessive attachment to comprehensive processing, you create space for attention allocation based on genuine priority, rather than recency or visibility. Consider how many significant creative and intellectual contributions throughout history required the willingness to be temporarily unreachable. The deep work that demands sustained, uninterrupted focus rather than continuous availability. This pattern reveals the necessary relationship between meaningful creation and communication boundaries. The freedom found in caring less about Inbox Zero opens possibilities for attention allocation aligned with genuine contribution rather than administrative completionism. Part 52. Getting things right the first time. Many of us place extraordinary pressure on ourselves to execute perfectly on initial attempts. We experience disproportionate frustration when first drafts require substantial revision, initial presentations contain flaws, or new skills prove difficult to master immediately. The learning curve itself becomes evidence of inadequacy rather than a natural aspect of development. We expect from ourselves an immediate excellence that we would never demand from others. This pattern reveals our tendency to misinterpret struggle as failure rather than as necessary development. We mistake the messy middle for the final result. This fixation on immediate perfection creates several problems in our approach to new challenges. We procrastinate beginning important projects due to unrealistic expectations about initial quality. We abandon potentially valuable pursuits at the first experience of difficulty. We hide early attempts rather than seeking the feedback that would accelerate improvement. These reactions prevent the very iterations that enable eventual excellence. The perfectionism designed to ensure quality actually prevents its development. What makes this pattern particularly limiting is how profoundly it contradicts the actual development process in virtually every meaningful domain. Examinations of expertise acquisition consistently reveal that mastery emerges through extensive iteration, feedback incorporation, and progressive refinement. The polished final products we admire invariably evolved through multiple revisions rather than emerging fully formed. The books were rewritten, the presentations rehearsed, the skills gradually developed through persistent practice. The expectation of immediate excellence fundamentally misunderstands how capability actually develops. We demand what cannot exist, mastery without the messy middle. Caring less about getting things right the first time doesn't mean becoming careless or settling for mediocrity. It means aligning expectations with the actual development process in your chosen domain. It means recognizing initial difficulty as normal rather than as evidence of inadequacy. When you release excessive attachment to immediate perfection, you create space for the iterations that genuine excellence requires. Consider how many masterworks across domains began as deeply flawed initial attempts. The classic novel that began as a rough draft, the business that pivoted from its original concept, the scientific breakthrough that emerged through multiple failed experiments. These examples reveal the necessary relationship between initial imperfection and eventual excellence. The freedom found in caring less about getting things right immediately opens possibilities for the developmental process that mastery actually requires. Part 53. Social media presence. Many of us have developed an uneasy relationship with our online representations. We feel implicit pressure to maintain active, engaging presences across various platforms. Extended absences trigger concerns about relevance, missed opportunities, or social disconnection. We experience mild anxiety when platform algorithms or attention patterns shift. This pattern reveals our growing conflation of digital representation with actual social existence. The profile becomes confused with the person. This fixation on social media presence creates several problems in our relationship with technology. We interrupt in-person experiences to document them for online sharing. We assess real-world moments partially through their potential digital presentation. We experience FOMO regarding platforms or features we've intentionally limited. These reactions transform tools designed for connection into sources of persistent distraction and social performance anxiety. The medium eclipses the message it was meant to convey. What makes this pattern particularly problematic is how fundamentally it distorts authentic connection. The platforms themselves incentivize carefully curated performances rather than genuine vulnerability or exchange. The metrics reward what captures attention rather than what nurtures relationship. The algorithmic intermediation ensures we see what triggers engagement rather than what might foster understanding. These structural realities make social media particularly poor substitutes for the authentic connection they often displace. We sacrifice depth for breadth, quality for quantity, presence for performance. Caring less about social media presence doesn't mean becoming a digital hermit or technological pessimist. It means developing a more intentional relationship with these platforms based on their actual contribution to what you value. It means recognizing when online engagement serves connection versus when it becomes performance or obligation. When you release excessive attachment to digital presence, you create space for relationships characterized by depth rather than display. Consider how many of your most meaningful connections and experiences have occurred entirely offline or through direct rather than platform-mediated exchange. The conversations without an audience, the experiences undocumented for sharing, the relationships developed through private rather than public interaction. This reflection reveals what genuine connection typically requires. The freedom found in caring less about social media presence opens possibilities for engagement based on authentic exchange rather than performance and metrics. Part 54. Brand Loyalty. Many of us develop surprisingly strong attachments to commercial entities and their offerings. We feel genuine affinity for particular brands of technology, clothing, food, or transportation. These preferences gradually transform from practical choices into components of identity. We experience mild defensiveness when preferred brands receive criticism. This pattern reveals our tendency to imbue commercial relationships with emotional and identity significance far beyond their functional role. The economic transaction becomes confused with personal values and self-concept. This fixation on brand affiliation creates several problems in our consumer behavior. We pay premium prices for marginal quality differences due to emotional rather than practical assessment. We resist superior alternatives due to established brand habits rather than comparative evaluation. We experience unnecessary emotion when preferred brands change direction or quality. These reactions transform what should be primarily utilitarian decisions into inappropriate sources of identity and loyalty. The commercial becomes personal in ways that rarely serve our actual interests. What makes this pattern particularly problematic is the fundamental asymmetry in brand relationships. While consumers often develop genuine emotional attachments to brands, corporations necessarily relate to customers primarily as revenue sources. The loyalty flows predominantly in one direction from customer to company, while flowing the other direction only when financially advantageous. This imbalance makes brand loyalty a particularly poor investment of emotional resources. We offer personal attachment to entities structurally incapable of reciprocating in kind. The relationship remains fundamentally transactional despite personal significance on one side. Caring less about brand loyalty doesn't mean becoming cynical about all commercial relationships. It means maintaining more appropriate emotional distance from what are ultimately business transactions. It means recognizing when preference has transformed from practical assessment into identity marker. When you release excessive attachment to particular brands, you create space for more objective evaluation of what actually serves your practical needs rather than emotional affiliations. Consider how rapidly loyalty can shift when a previously favored brand significantly decreases quality, increases price, or acts counter to claimed values. The conditional nature of the relationship reveals its fundamentally transactional character despite emotional overlay. This reality check provides perspective on the appropriate place of brand preferences in a balanced life. The freedom found in caring less about brand loyalty opens possibilities for consumption based on actual value rather than identity maintenance. Part 55. The Ideal Body. Our culture bombards us with increasingly unrealistic physical ideals, while simultaneously pretending they represent attainable standards. Magazine covers, social media influencers, and advertisements present carefully edited and often digitally manipulated images as aspirational goals. These representations create profound distortions in our relationships with our actual bodies. We experience genuine distress about physical characteristics that fall within normal human variation. This pattern reveals our susceptibility to manufactured comparison points that serve commercial interests rather than well-being. We internalize artificial standards designed specifically to create profitable dissatisfaction. This fixation on idealized physical appearance creates several problems in our relationship with embodiment. We engage in unsustainable or harmful practices attempting to achieve what often requires genetic predisposition or professional resources. We experience persistent shame about characteristics that represent normal human diversity rather than deficiency. We allocate disproportionate resources toward appearance relative to other aspects of health and well-being. These reactions transform the body from the vehicle of lived experience into a perpetual project of inadequacy. The miraculous instrument of existence becomes reduced to its aesthetic presentation. What makes this pattern particularly destructive is how dramatically it misrepresents the actual diversity of healthy human bodies. Research consistently demonstrates far greater natural variation in healthy body composition, proportion, and appearance than media representations suggest. The narrow range presented as ideal typically requires not just discipline but genetic predisposition, professional styling, advantageous photography, and often digital manipulation. The apparently attainable standard actually represents a largely fictional composite. The pursuit of this fiction leads many toward practices that paradoxically damage the very health that beauty theoretically signifies. The means undermine the purported end. Caring less about idealized body standards doesn't mean abandoning health practices or becoming indifferent to physical well-being. It means developing a more functional relationship with your body based on how it feels and functions rather than exclusively how it appears. It means recognizing when aesthetic pursuits support versus undermine actual physical and psychological health. When you release excessive attachment to narrow beauty standards, you create space for appreciation of your body's remarkable capabilities beyond its visual presentation. Consider how many of life's most meaningful physical experiences have little relationship to aesthetic ideals. The strength to carry a child, the endurance to hike a mountain, the coordination to dance with abandon, the sensory capacity to fully experience pleasure. These embodied gifts reveal what actually matters about physical existence. The freedom found in caring less about idealized appearance opens possibilities for a relationship with your body based on gratitude for function rather than criticism of form. Part 56. Having an impressive morning routine. Contemporary productivity culture places extraordinary emphasis on elaborately optimized morning rituals. We encounter endless articles and influencer content showcasing multi-step processes involving meditation, journaling, exercise, cold exposure, specialized nutrition, and more. These aspirational routines create implicit pressure to front-load an impractical number of wellness practices into early hours. We experience mild inadequacy when our own mornings fail to match these curated ideals. This pattern reveals our susceptibility to performance optimization frameworks that often better serve content creation than actual well-being. We mistake the design for Instagram routine for genuine self-care. This fixation on impressive morning routines creates several problems in our relationship with daily rhythms. We attempt unsustainably complex processes that gradually erode through inevitable life variations. We experience unnecessary guilt when sleep needs, family responsibilities, or work demands prevent adherence to arbitrary ideals. We judge days as off-track when mornings don't proceed according to optimal planning. These reactions transform what should be gentle on-ramps to the day into high-pressure performance zones. The morning becomes an achievement test rather than a transition period. What makes this pattern particularly problematic is how dramatically it overlooks individual variation in optimal daily rhythms. Research consistently demonstrates significant differences in chronotypes, with some people naturally more alert and effective in mornings while others function better later in the day. Life circumstances, including parenting responsibilities, work schedules, and health conditions, further diversify what constitutes an effective start to the day. The standardized ideal ignores this legitimate variation. The one-size-fits-all approach guarantees poor fit for many. We force ourselves into patterns that may fundamentally misalign with our specific needs and circumstances. Caring less about impressive morning routines doesn't mean abandoning intentional approaches to starting your day. It means developing patterns based on your actual energy rhythms, responsibilities, and well-being needs rather than arbitrary ideals. It means recognizing when routine serves function versus when it becomes performance. When you release excessive attachment to optimized morning templates, you create space for rhythms that genuinely support your specific circumstances. Consider how many accomplished individuals throughout history maintained morning patterns that would fail contemporary optimization standards. The late risers, the slow starters, the gradually ramping creative minds whose contributions emerged through pathways that ignored current ideals. These examples reveal the diversity of effective approaches to daily rhythms. The freedom found in caring less about impressive morning routines opens possibilities for patterns aligned with your actual needs rather than arbitrary standards. Part 57. Always having a plan. Many of us feel intense discomfort with unstructured time or undefined paths forward. We experience genuine anxiety when facing open days without scheduled activities or life phases without clear objectives. The absence of explicit direction feels not like freedom, but like disorienting emptiness. We quickly fill calendar spaces and life questions with plans to alleviate this discomfort. This pattern reveals our difficulty tolerating the inherent uncertainty of existence. We substitute structure for the courage to face openness. This fixation on continuous planning creates several problems in our experience of time. We fill potentially restorative open periods with unnecessary activities. We prematurely commit to directions before adequate exploration of possibilities. We experience discomfort with the spontaneity that often generates unexpected joy. These reactions transform time from a field of potential into a series of obligations. The future becomes something to control rather than to discover. What makes this pattern particularly limiting is how it prevents the conditions necessary for certain forms of insight and renewal. Research consistently shows that creative breakthroughs, perspective shifts, and deeper understandings often emerge precisely during unstructured periods. The mind requires space without explicit direction, to make unexpected connections and generate novel approaches. The relentless planning that feels productive actually prevents the necessary conditions for certain forms of productivity. We optimize for immediate comfort at the expense of deeper development. The apparent efficiency creates hidden inefficiency. Caring less about always having a plan doesn't mean abandoning intentionality or useful structure. It means developing greater comfort with periods of openness and undefined direction. It means recognizing when planning serves genuine function versus when it primarily manages anxiety. When you release excessive attachment to continuous definition, you create space for the discoveries that emerge only through willingness to temporarily not know. Consider how many significant life developments have emerged not through careful planning, but through unexpected discoveries during open periods. The chance encounters, the spontaneous experiments, the unpredicted opportunities that arose precisely when space existed to accommodate them. These experiences reveal what becomes possible when we release the compulsion to define every step in advance. The freedom found in caring less about constant planning opens possibilities for developments that no plan could have anticipated. Part 58. Historical mistakes. Many of us expend significant mental energy revisiting and recriminating ourselves for past errors. We repeatedly replay embarrassing moments, poor decisions, or missed opportunities from months or even years earlier. These memories trigger fresh waves of shame, regret, or frustration, despite their historical nature. We treat past mistakes as current character evidence rather than as completed learning experiences. This pattern reveals our difficulty distinguishing between who we were and who we are. The past self's errors become permanent indictments rather than developmental steps. This fixation on historical mistakes creates several problems in our relationship with our own narrative. We experience unnecessary repeated suffering over events that cannot be changed. We develop excessive caution to prevent similar errors, often restricting growth possibilities. We maintain shame that interferes with current functioning long after any useful lesson has been extracted. These reactions transform past experiences from teachers into tormentors. What might serve as valuable information becomes ongoing punishment. What makes this pattern particularly unproductive is its fundamental misalignment with how memory and growth actually function. Our recollection of past events is notoriously unreliable, with emotions colouring and distorting factual recall. We consistently overemphasize our responsibility in negative outcomes while underweighting contextual factors. This distorted remembering prevents accurate understanding of what actually occurred and what might genuinely be learned. Meanwhile, the emotional distress generated through rumination offers no compensatory insight. We suffer without corresponding gain. Caring less about historical mistakes doesn't mean denying responsibility or failing to learn from experience. It means extracting whatever lesson a situation offers, making amends where possible, and then intentionally releasing the emotional attachment. It means recognizing when continued focus on past errors serves growth versus when it merely generates suffering. When you release excessive attachment to historical mistakes, you create space for a relationship with your personal history characterized by learning rather than self-punishment. Consider how you would respond to a valued friend sharing a mistake similar to one that you continue to revisit in your own past. The compassion, perspective, and encouragement toward future possibility you would naturally offer. This imagined response reveals the disproportionate harshness we often apply exclusively to ourselves. The freedom found in caring less about historical mistakes opens possibilities for self-relationship based on growth-oriented compassion rather than punitive rumination. Part 59. Emotional consistency. Many of us place unrealistic expectations on our emotional landscapes, demanding steady positivity or at least stability. We experience meta-distress when natural emotional fluctuations occur. Feeling sad becomes not just sadness, but failing at happiness. Anxiety triggers not just its direct discomfort, but additional concern about being anxious. This pattern reveals our misunderstanding of normal emotional functioning. We mistake the natural variability of feeling for psychological malfunction. This fixation on emotional consistency creates several problems in our psychological experience. We develop secondary suffering layered on top of primary emotions. We expend energy attempting to suppress or change natural reactions rather than processing them efficiently. We interpret normal variability as evidence of deficiency requiring correction. These reactions transform ordinary emotional rhythm into unnecessary psychological struggle. The normal becomes pathologized. What makes this pattern particularly counterproductive is how it fundamentally contradicts the actual nature of healthy emotional functioning. Psychological research consistently shows that emotional diversity, rather than stability, characterizes well-being. The capacity to experience the full range of emotions, including difficult ones, correlates with better long-term mental health outcomes than does emotional restriction. The acceptance of varying emotional states actually facilitates their efficient processing and passage. The resistance to emotional fluctuation paradoxically prolongs the very states we wish to avoid. We create the persistence we fear through our very attempt to prevent it. Caring less about emotional consistency doesn't mean becoming indifferent to psychological well-being. It means developing a more accommodating relationship with the natural ebb and flow of feeling states. It means recognizing when emotional management serves function versus when it creates additional unnecessary suffering. When you release excessive attachment to constant positivity or stability, you create space for more efficient processing of whatever emotions naturally arise. Consider how many meaningful human experiences necessarily involve complex emotional landscapes beyond simple positivity. The bittersweetness of witnessing a child's growing independence, the mingled grief and gratitude when remembering someone loved and lost, the nervous excitement before important challenges. These rich emotional textures reveal what becomes possible when we allow, rather than resist, emotional diversity. The freedom found in caring less about emotional consistency opens possibilities for experiences characterized by depth rather than restriction. Part 60. Finding your passion. Contemporary culture places extraordinary emphasis on discovering one's singular calling or perfect fit. We encounter persistent messaging suggesting that somewhere exists the ideal pursuit that will simultaneously energize, fulfill, and sustain us. This framing creates intense pressure to identify this hypothetical perfect match. We experience genuine anxiety about potentially selecting the wrong path or missing our true calling. This pattern reveals our desire for certainty in the inherently uncertain domain of life direction. We seek guarantees where only experiments exist. This fixation on finding one's passion creates several problems in career and life development. We delay meaningful commitment to available opportunities while searching for hypothetical perfect fits. We experience unnecessary distress when initial engagement with promising directions includes the inevitable challenges and periodic tedium that all pursuits contain. We interpret normal obstacles as evidence of misalignment rather than as expected aspects of any worthwhile endeavor. These reactions prevent the sustained engagement that meaningful development requires. The search for passion paradoxically inhibits its emergence. What makes this pattern particularly limiting is how dramatically it misrepresents the typical development of meaningful engagement. Research on career satisfaction and life purpose suggests that passion typically emerges through involvement rather than preceding it. Significant interest develops gradually through capability building and deepening understanding. The emotional resonance comes after investment, not before it. The expectation that passion should guide choice rather than follow from it fundamentally reverses the more common development pattern. We wait for what typically comes through action rather than before it. Caring less about finding your passion doesn't mean settling for meaningless or misaligned pursuits. It means recognizing that engagement typically precedes rather than follows emotional connection to an activity. It means understanding that virtually any direction pursued with curiosity and commitment can develop into meaningful engagement. When you release excessive attachment to finding the perfect fit, you create space for the cultivation of passion through sustained involvement rather than discovery. Consider how many individuals reporting high career satisfaction describe gradually growing into their field, rather than immediately recognizing it as their destiny. The commitment that preceded rather than followed the emotional connection. These developmental patterns reveal a more reliable path to meaningful engagement than the love-at-first-sight model of passion discovery. The freedom found in caring less about finding your passion opens possibilities for developing significant connection through committed exploration, rather than waiting for magical recognition.